Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a time that feels far away, but it's not. The truth is, Tudor England doesn't haunt history books. It haunts bedrooms, kitchens, and whispered family traditions that somehow still echo. And tonight, we'll trace the hidden road young women walked just to get married, if you can call it that. Now, here's something most people miss: the trials of Tudor girls didn't start with the wedding bells. They started when someone mentioned your hips before your homework. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting romance, lace, and happy endings. But you might leave with something better clarity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments too. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge home from the village market, basket heavier than usual, though it's mostly turnips and dry bread. Your feet ache in their secondhand shoes, but it's not the weight of the basket that slows you. It's the voice still ringing in your ears, the neighbor who asked, too casually, when your father would start looking for your match. You're 13. You still climb trees when no one's watching, but apparently, you're now of age. In Tudor England, that phrase doesn't mean maturity. It means visibility. It means your body is now publicly available for speculation. And once noticed, you can't go back to being unseen. You walk differently now, shoulders folded inward, as if that might delay what's coming. Spoiler alert, it won't. Dinner that night tastes like boiled regret and unspoken decisions. Your father eyes you with a mixture of affection and anxiety. He doesn't say it outright, but you feel it in his silence. He's measuring your future, calculating your dowry like it's a debt he's trying to hide in the margins. Your mother adjusts your hair, but it's not about neatness. It's about appearance. Your waist is inspected more than your handwriting. Your skin, your posture, your smile, everything is part of a subtle audition you didn't agree to attend. In wealthier homes, the same scene plays out just with more embroidery. Even noble girls, tucked into velvet beds and perfumed chambers, feel the same pressure curling around their throats like a too tight ruff. One historical fact most people miss in Tudor England: noble girls were often betrothed as early as age 7. That's the age when you're barely old enough to spell your own name and yet already someone else's future wife. Queen Mary. I was engaged at just 2 years old. Historians still argue whether these child betrothals were symbolic or strategic. But either way, they left a bruise on the girl's identity. You grow up knowing you belong to someone you've never met. There's a moment, late at night, when your mother thinks you're asleep. She kneels by the fire, smoothing your hem where it frayed during your walk. Her fingers linger on the fabric as if wishing she could patch your future as easily as your skirt. You pretend to sleep because you can't bear to see her cry. You also pretend not to notice how often she flinches when your father raises his voice, not at her, not usually, but loud enough to remind everyone who holds the keys to this house. And one day soon, he'll pass those keys to another man. Not to you, never to you, just through you. Your days change. Suddenly, you're not allowed to go to the well alone. You're scolded for laughing too loudly. You're warned about looking boys in the eye, because now, every glance is a negotiation, every movement a test. You sit straighter, walk quieter, and wear colors that don't draw too much attention. Not because you want to, but because someone, somewhere, might be watching. And if the wrong person sees the wrong thing, your entire future could collapse. This is the part where you start to understand marriage isn't a choice. It's a destination you're shoved toward, like a ship launched down a muddy slope. At church, the sermons start to sting more. The priest talks about women being the weaker vessel. You glance at your mother's hands, red and cracked from endless scrubbing, and wonder what he would know about strength. The congregation nods. You stay quiet, because challenging a man in robes could mean punishment for your whole family. In Tudor law, the spiritual was political, and if religion said marriage was sacred, then resisting it could sound a lot like heresy. And you don't want to end up like Alice Walker, the girl from 2 villages over who was caught kissing a farmer's son and vanished into a convent, or worse. The irony. For all this pressure, No one ever asks what you want. That's the joke. Really, you're the main character in this melodrama, but your lines are written by everyone else. Your father arranges, your mother advises, the midwife calculates your ripeness, and the suitors, they're the audience, judging silently from afar. One might be twice your age, but with a full purse. Another is charming, but improperly landed. And that third one, the one who stares too long and smiles too wide, he's your father's favorite. Of course he is. You start to rehearse the polite nods, the half smiles, the way your voice should rise at the end of every sentence, like you're asking permission to speak. Quirky fact, some girls tried to sabotage their appeal. Historical records mention one girl who smeared ash into her teeth before a suitor's visit so she'd look unwell. Another faked a limp. One even shaved her eyebrows, hoping to look cursed. It didn't always work. Sometimes it made things worse. But you understand the desperation, because once a man shows interest, it's nearly impossible to say no. And if you do, your name is whispered with pity, or suspicion, or both. There's a moment, not long from now, when you'll be summoned to the front room. Your father's voice will be stiff with formality. The man beside him will reek of horse sweat and confidence. He'll glance at your hands before he looks at your face. He'll ask you if you like to read, not because he wants to know, but because he's been told girls do that now. You'll answer yes, and he'll smirk like that makes you exotic. He won't ask what you read. Why would he? The important thing is that you're pleasant, obedient, breedable, and when he leaves, your father will say, he's considering it, like it's an honor, like it's not terrifying. You'll nod, smile, excuse yourself politely, then you'll run to the backfield and scream into the wind. No one will hear, but for one brief moment, it will feel like you belong to yourself again. You wake up the next morning with a lump in your throat that no cup of broth can wash down. The visit from that suitor, if you can call a man 3 decades older than you. A suitor lingers like smoke in the drapes. You try to act normal, but even your younger brother notices the way your hands tremble as you lace your bodice. He asks if you're cold. You smile too quickly and nod. Cold. You could be on fire, and they'd still call it a girl's natural modesty. Today, the whispers have turned to glances. The neighbor's daughter nudges her friend when you pass. One of them giggles. The other just stares. You know what they're thinking it started. And once it starts, it rarely stops. Your mother begins talking about fabrics. Not the soft kind, the respectable kind, stiff silks, high collars, the type of dresses that make your shoulders ache by midday. She's measuring your wrists, not to flatter you, but to fit you into the mold, into the market. There's a saying now, a well-dressed daughter is a well-advertised dowry. One historian jokes that Tudor girls were born in linen and sold in lace, but the joke cuts sharp because it's not far off. Whether you're a merchant's daughter or a milkmaid, your appearance is a resume. Your father checks it like it's a tax document, and you feel like a ledger written in flesh. That phrase, marriageable, hangs in the air like mildew. You're no longer described as kind or clever. You're of good childbearing age, modestly proportioned, respectably obedient. It's all code, and you've cracked it. They're saying she'll stay quiet, and she'll survive of childbirth. Maybe because even now, before a ring is placed on your finger, childbirth is already part of the conversation. In Tudor England, every girl came with 2 expectations: produce an heir, and don't die doing it. You ask your aunt, in a moment of daring, whether it hurts. She only laughs, a low, brittle laugh that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. It always hurts, she says, if you're lucky enough to live through it. That kind of honesty is rare. Most grown women speak in riddles. They call it becoming a woman or fulfilling your station. But you start to pick up on the code. You notice how the women in the village fall silent when someone says the name Anne, or was it Alice? You can't quite remember, because the stories blur. There are so many of them. Women who bled too much, or too early, or not enough. Girls who married in spring and were buried by winter. One died before her wedding night, another the day after. Historians still argue whether these deaths were anomalies or routine. But what they agree on is this marriage was rarely the end of a girl's suffering. More often, it was the beginning. And yet, no one calls it tragic. They call it life. That's just how things are. Your mother says when you push too hard, you want to scream, to throw something, to curse the sky, but you don't, because even rage is a luxury. If you want to survive, you learn to channel your fury into something quieter. A tightened stitch, a curt nod, a slightly sharper glance when your name is mentioned. You're being watched by neighbors, by relatives, by old women with opinions and young men with appetites. You become hyper-aware of your own posture, how your hands rest in your lap, whether your voice dips too low when you answer a question. It's exhausting. Playing a role you never auditioned for. Meanwhile, the matchmaking begins in earnest. You overhear your father talking to a friend from the guild, something about timing the betrothal with the harvest and ensuring the terms favor both sides. You'd think he was discussing cattle, not his own daughter. And maybe that's the point. Property is property, and you're not just part of the estate, you are the estate. A movable asset with a heartbeat. In poor households, the calculations are even more blunt. A daughter married off means one less mouth to feed, and if she marries well, maybe she sends coin home. That's the hope. Anyway, you're not a person. You're a gamble. But sometimes, the dice surprise you. One girl in your parish married for love. A scandal. She and a woodcutter's son ran off in the night. When they returned weeks later, married by a wandering priest, the entire town treated her like a ghost. Her father never spoke to her again. The local baker refused to sell her bread, and the priest, well, no one could ever quite prove who he was. Some say he was just a fraud in a robe. Others think he was punished, quietly, by the bishop. Either way, the couple vanished again within a year. Some say they went north. Others say she died in childbirth. You like to imagine she lived, but you don't dare say that aloud. It's funny, in a grim kind of way, how much of your life is dictated by men's choices. A suitor sees your ankle and decides you're too bold. Another hears you correct your brother's Latin and thinks you're too clever. You can be discarded for being too loud or too quiet, too pale or too freckled. There's no winning. Even the queen, yes. The queen was scrutinized for her fertility, her manners, her moral purity. Anne Boleyn, you recall, was beheaded partly because she failed to give Henry a son. They called it treason. You call it biology. There's one day you won't forget. A feast day. The village is alive with banners and drums. You're in the crowd, trying to enjoy the music, when a nobleman's steward stops in front of you. He leans in, smirks, and says, "You've grown into a proper little thing, haven't you?" It's not the words. It's the tone, the ownership in it. You smile politely and take a step back. Later, your mother scolds you for walking away too quickly. He could have taken interest, she hisses. You want to say you're not merchandise, but even as the thought forms, it chokes itself. Because in Tudor England, denying your role isn't just rude, it's dangerous. Here's a fringe tidbit you overheard from the apothecary's wife, who's always a bit too honest after 2 cups of cider. Apparently, some women brewed herbal tonics to cause delays in their cycle natural birth control, centuries before it had a name. It was risky, illegal, and mostly whispered about behind locked doors. But it happened because not every girl wanted to be a mother, not every woman wanted to be a wife. But those desires didn't matter. Survival mattered, reputation mattered, and in this world, one wrong move could cost you everything. You're told to dream of a wedding, but you don't. You dream of running, not far, just into the woods, just long enough to be alone, to breathe, to scream without anyone calling it hysteria. You imagine what it would be like to cut your hair, wear a boy's tunic, and vanish. Some did, disguised themselves, fled the system, became stories half believed by candlelight. Historians still debate how many girls disappeared into such shadows. Most weren't recorded, but that makes their silence louder, doesn't it? At night, you lie awake and stare at the beams above your bed. You count the knots in the wood, like they're answers, but there are none. Just this, your life is being planned without you. You will marry someone soon, and all you can do now is prepare. You sit at the edge of the hearth, needle in hand, pretending to focus on the embroidery you've redone 3 times already. The thread keeps tangling, but not because you're careless, because your hands won't stop shaking. A new name has entered the conversation, Sir Godfrey. You've never met him, but you've heard of him. Widower. 2 grown sons. Owns a manor and most of the valley that floods every other spring. He's nearly 60. You are not, and yet, your father says his offer is generous. And your mother keeps saying things like security and future and you'll grow fond in time. The words sound as hollow as a church bell at midnight. You keep nodding because nodding is easier than screaming, and nobody's really asking for your opinion anyway. In Tudor England, a good match is never about kindness. It's about heirs, land, and making sure you don't die poor. Whether you'll be happy is about as relevant as whether the sheep like their pen. There's something surreal about hearing adults talk about you like you're a bundle of firewood. Your temperament, your hips, your eyes, they discuss you like butchers weighing cuts of meat. And if you're lucky, someone says something flattering, like she'll hold up well under childbirth. You want to disappear into the bricks. You want to trade places with the family dog, who at least gets to sleep without obligation. And worst of all, you start wondering if maybe this is fine. Maybe this is what everyone does. Maybe you're the problem for wanting something else. You hate that thought, but it slips in anyway, because after a while, the cage becomes familiar. You memorize its corners. You tell yourself the bars are just shadows. Sir Godfrey sends a token, an embroidered handkerchief you're supposed to find charming. It's rough linen with your initials stitched onto it by someone who's clearly never met you. The Y curls the wrong way. You fold it and place it under your pillow, out of sight. That night, you hear your mother whispering that it's a step forward and a respectable offer. She sounds more hopeful than you've ever heard her. And that's when the guilt creeps in, because you don't just carry your own dreams, you carry hers too. She wants you safe, sheltered, married to a man who won't beat you more than necessary, and who won't gamble the roof away. It's not love, it's insurance, and maybe that's all she ever had. So it's all she knows how to offer you. There's a twisted humor to it. You, the girl who used to steal apples and play soldier with the boys in the dirt, are now expected to sit beside a man old enough to remember the sweating sickness and giggle at his jokes about gout. You wonder if your body will recoil when he touches you. You hope he never does, but of course he will, because that's the point of all this. A match isn't a dinner party, it's a transaction with consequences. You're expected to produce something, preferably sons, quickly, and if you don't, the whispers will turn venomous. People will talk about your womb like it's public property. One noblewoman, barren after 3 years, was accused of sorcery. Historians still argue whether the accusation was political or sincere, but she was locked in a tower either way. Sometimes, when no one's watching, you write your name in the dirt with a stick your full name, not the one you'll lose when you marry. You watch the wind erase it. There's a metaphor in there, but it's too bleak to name. So you just brush your skirts and move on. You see other girls around you entering the same procession, like lambs being gently guided toward gates they don't realize will never open again. One childhood friend marries a merchant's son. She smiles like she means it. You wonder if she does. A month later, you see her with bruises on her wrists. She says she tripped. Everyone nods. You say nothing. Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a time that feels far away, but it's not. The truth is, Tudor England doesn't haunt history books. It haunts bedrooms, kitchens, and whispered family traditions that somehow still echo. And tonight, we'll trace the hidden road young women walked just to get married, if you can call it that. Now, here's something most people miss. The trials of Tudor girls didn't start with the wedding bells. They started when someone mentioned your hips before your homework. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting romance, lace, and happy endings. But you might leave with something better clarity. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments too. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge home from the village market, basket heavier than usual, though it's mostly turnips and dry bread. Your feet ache in their secondhand shoes, but it's not the weight of the basket that slows you. It's the voice still ringing in your ears, the neighbor who asked, too casually, when your father would start looking for your match. You're 13. You still climb trees when no one's watching, but apparently, you're now of age, in Tudor England. That phrase doesn't mean maturity. It means visibility. It means your body is now publicly available for speculation. And once noticed, you can't go back to being unseen. You walk differently now, shoulders folded inward, as if that might delay what's coming. Spoiler alert, it won't. Dinner that night tastes like boiled regret and unspoken decisions. Your father eyes you with a mixture of affection and anxiety. He doesn't say it outright, but you feel it in his silence. He's measuring your future, calculating your dowry like it's a debt he's trying to hide in the margins. Your mother adjusts your hair, but it's not about neatness. It's about appearance. Your waist is inspected more than your handwriting, your skin, your posture, your smile. Everything is part of a subtle audition you didn't agree to attend. In wealthier homes, the same scene plays out just with more embroidery. Even noble girls, tucked into velvet beds and perfumed chambers, feel the same pressure curling around their throats like a too tight ruff. One historical fact most people miss in Tudor England. Noble girls were often betrothed as early as age 7. 7. That's the age when you're barely old enough to spell your own name, and yet already someone else's future wife. Queen Mary. I was engaged at just 2 years old. Historians still argue whether these child betrothals were symbolic or strategic, but either way, they left a bruise on the girl's identity. You grow up knowing you belong to someone you've never met. There's a moment, late at night, when your mother thinks you're asleep. She kneels by the fire, smoothing your hem where it frayed during your walk. Her fingers linger on the fabric as if wishing she could patch your future as easily as your skirt. You pretend to sleep because you can't bear to see her cry. You also pretend not to notice how often she flinches when your father raises his voice, not at her, not usually, but loud enough to remind everyone who holds the keys to this house, and one day soon, he'll pass those keys to another man. Not to you, never to you, just through you. Your days change. Suddenly, you're not allowed to go to the well alone. You're scolded for laughing too loudly. You're warned about looking boys in the eye. Because now, every glance is a negotiation, every movement a test. You sit straighter, walk quieter, and wear colors that don't draw too much attention. Not because you want to, but because someone, somewhere, might be watching. And if the wrong person sees the wrong thing, your entire future could collapse. This is the part where you start to understand marriage isn't a choice. It's a destination you're shoved toward, like a ship launched down a muddy slope. At church, the sermons start to sting more. The priest talks about women being the weaker vessel. You glance at your mother's hands, red and cracked from endless scrubbing, and wonder what he would know about strength. The congregation nods. You stay quiet, because challenging a man in robes could mean punishment for your whole family. In Tudor law, the spiritual was political, and if religion said marriage was sacred, then resisting it could sound a lot like heresy. And you don't want to end up like Alice Walker, the girl from 2 villages over who was caught kissing a farmer's son and vanished into a convent, or worse. The irony for all this pressure, no one ever asks what you want. That's the joke. Really, you're the main character in this melodrama, but your lines are written by everyone else. Your father arranges, your mother advises, the midwife calculates your ripeness, and the suitors, they're the audience, judging silently from afar. One might be twice your age, but with a full purse. Another is charming, but improperly landed. And that third one, the one who stares too long and smiles too wide, he's your father's favorite. Of course he is. You start to rehearse the polite nods, the half smiles, the way your voice should rise at the end of every sentence, like you're asking permission to speak. Quirky fact: some girls tried to sabotage their appeal. Historical records mention one girl who smeared ash into her teeth before a suitor's visit so she'd look unwell. Another faked a limp. One even shaved her eyebrows, hoping to look cursed. It didn't always work. Sometimes It made things worse, but you understand the desperation, because once a man shows interest, it's nearly impossible to say no. And if you do, your name is whispered with pity, or suspicion, or both. There's a moment, not long from now, when you'll be summoned to the front room. Your father's voice will be stiff with formality. The man beside him will reek of horse sweat and confidence. He'll glance at your hands before he looks at your face. He'll ask you if you like to read, not because he wants to know, but because he's been told girls do that now. You'll answer yes, and he'll smirk like that makes you exotic. He won't ask what you read. Why would he? The important thing is that you're pleasant, obedient, breedable, and when he leaves, your father will say, he's considering it, like it's an honor, like it's not terrifying. You'll nod, smile, excuse yourself politely, then you'll run to the backfield and scream into the wind. No one will hear, but for one brief moment, it will feel like you belong to yourself again. You wake up the next morning with a lump in your throat that no cup of broth can wash down. The visit from that suitor, if you can call a man 3 decades older than you, a suitor lingers like smoke in the drapes. You try to act normal, but even your younger brother notices the way your hands tremble as you lace your bodice. He asks if you're cold. You smile too quickly and nod. Cold. You could be on fire, and they'd still call it a girl's natural modesty. Today, the whispers have turned to glances. The neighbor's daughter nudges her friend when you pass. One of them giggles. The other just stares. You know what they're thinking it started. And once it starts, it rarely stops. Your mother begins talking about fabrics. Not the soft kind. The respectable kind. Stiff silks. High collars. The type of dresses that make your shoulders ache by midday. She's measuring your wrists. Not to flatter you, but to fit you into the mold. Into the market. There's a saying now, a well-dressed daughter is a well-advertised dowry. One historian jokes that Tudor girls were born in linen and sold in lace, but the joke cuts sharp, because it's not far off. Whether you're a merchant's daughter or a milkmaid, your appearance is a resume. Your father checks it like it's a tax document, and you feel like a ledger written in flesh. That phrase, marriageable, hangs in the air like mildew. You're no longer described as kind or clever. You're of good childbearing age, modestly proportioned, respectably obedient. It's all code, and you've cracked it. They're saying she'll stay quiet, and she'll survive childbirth. Maybe, because even now, before a ring is placed on your finger, childbirth is already part of the conversation. In Tudor England, every girl came with 2 expectations: produce an heir and don't die doing it. You ask your aunt, in a moment of daring, whether it hurts. She only laughs, a low, brittle laugh that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. It always hurts, she says, if you're lucky enough to live through it. That kind of honesty is rare. Most grown women speak in riddles. They call it becoming a woman or fulfilling your station. But you start to pick up on the code. You notice how the women in the village fall silent when someone says the name Anne, or was it Alice? You can't quite remember, because the stories blur. There are so many of them. Women who bled too much, or too early, or not enough. Girls who married in spring and were buried by winter. One died before her wedding night, another the day after. Historians still argue whether these deaths were anomalies or routine, but what they agree on is this marriage was rarely the end of a girl's suffering. More often, it was the beginning, and yet, no one calls it tragic. They call it life. That's just how things are. Your mother says when you push too hard, you want to scream, to throw something, to curse the sky, but you don't, because even rage is a luxury. If you want to survive, you learn to channel your fury into something quieter. A tightened stitch, a curt nod, a slightly sharper glance when your name is mentioned. You're being watched by neighbors, by relatives, by old women with opinions and young men with appetites. You become hyper-aware of your own posture, how your hands rest in your lap, whether your voice dips too low when you answer a question. It's exhausting, playing a role you never auditioned for. Meanwhile, the matchmaking begins in earnest. You overhear your father talking to a friend from the guild, something about timing the betrothal with the harvest and ensuring the terms favor both sides. You think he was discussing cattle, not his own daughter. And maybe that's the point. Property is property, and you're not just part of the estate, you are the estate. A movable asset with a heartbeat. In poorer households, the calculations are even more blunt. A daughter married off means one less mouth to feed. And if she marries well, maybe she sends coin home. That's the hope, anyway. You're not a person, you're a gamble. But sometimes, the dice surprise you. One girl in your parish married for love. A scandal. She and a woodcutter's son ran off in the night. When they returned weeks later, married by a wandering priest, the entire town treated her like a ghost. Her father never spoke to her again. The local baker refused to sell her bread, and the priest, well, no one could ever quite prove who he was. Some say he was just a fraud in a robe. Others think he was punished, quietly, by the bishop. Either way, the couple vanished again within a year. Some say they went north. Others say she died in childbirth. You like to imagine she lived, but you don't dare say that aloud. It's funny, in a grim kind of way, how much of your life is dictated by men's choices. A suitor sees your ankle and decides you're too bold. Another hears you correct your brother's Latin and thinks you're too clever. You can be discarded for being too loud or too quiet, too pale or too freckled. There's no winning. Even the queen. Yes, the queen was scrutinized for her fertility, her manners, her moral purity. Anne Boleyn, you recall, was beheaded partly because she failed to give Henry a son. They called it treason. You call it biology. There's one day you won't forget. A feast day. The village is alive with banners and drums. You're in the crowd, trying to enjoy the music, when a nobleman's steward stops in front of you. He leans in, smirks, and says, "You've grown into a proper little thing, haven't you?" It's not the words. It's the tone, the ownership in it. You smile politely and take a step back. Later, your mother scolds you for walking away too quickly. He could have taken interest. She hisses. You want to say you're not merchandise, but even as the thought forms, it chokes itself. Because in Tudor England, denying your role isn't just rude, it's dangerous. Here's a fringe tidbit you overheard from the apothecary's wife, who's always a bit too honest after 2 cups of cider. Apparently, some women brewed herbal tonics to cause delays in their cycle natural birth control, centuries before it had a name. It was risky, illegal, and mostly whispered about behind locked doors. But it happened, because not every girl wanted to be a mother. Not every woman wanted to be a wife. But those desires didn't matter. Survival mattered. Reputation mattered. And in this world, one wrong move could cost you everything. You're told to dream of a wedding, but you don't. You dream of running, not far, just into the woods, just long enough to be alone, to breathe, to scream without anyone calling it hysteria. You imagine what it would be like to cut your hair, wear a boy's tunic, and vanish. Some did, disguised themselves, fled the system, became stories half believed by candlelight. Historians still debate how many girls disappeared into such shadows. Most weren't recorded, but that makes their silence louder, doesn't it? At night, you lie awake and stare at the beams above your bed. You count the knots in the wood, like they're answers, but there are none. Just this your life is being planned without you. You will marry someone, soon, and all you can do now is prepare. You sit at the edge of the hearth, needle in hand, pretending to focus on the embroidery you've redone 3 times already. The thread keeps tangling, but not because you're careless, because your hands won't stop shaking. A new name has entered the conversation, Sir Godfrey. You've never met him, but you've heard of him. Widower, 2 grown sons, owns a manor and most of the valley that floods every other spring. He's nearly 60. You are not, and yet, your father says his offer is generous, and your mother keeps saying things like security and future, and you'll grow fond in time. The words sound as hollow as a church bell at midnight. You keep nodding because nodding is easier than screaming, and nobody's really asking for your opinion anyway. In Tudor England, a good match is never about kindness. It's about heirs, land, and making sure you don't die poor. Whether you'll be happy is about as relevant as whether the sheep like their pen. There's something surreal about hearing adults talk about you like you're a bundle of firewood. Your temperament, your hips, your eyes, they discuss you like butchers weighing cuts of meat. And if you're lucky, someone says something flattering, like she'll hold up well under childbirth. You want to disappear into the bricks. You want to trade places with the family dog, who at least gets to sleep without obligation. And worst of all, you start wondering if maybe this is fine. Maybe this is what everyone does. Maybe you're the problem for wanting something else. You hate that thought, but it slips in anyway, because after a while, the cage becomes familiar. You memorize its corners. You tell yourself the bars are just shadows. Sir Godfrey sends a token an embroidered handkerchief you're supposed to find charming. It's rough linen with your initials stitched onto it by someone who's clearly never met you. The Y curls the wrong way. You fold it and place it under your pillow, out of sight. That night, you hear your mother whispering that it's a step forward and a respectable offer. She sounds more hopeful than you've ever heard her. And that's when the guilt creeps in. Because you don't just carry your own dreams. You carry hers too. She wants you safe, sheltered, married to a man who won't beat you more than necessary, and who won't gamble the roof away. It's not love. It's insurance. And maybe that's all she ever had. So it's all she knows how to offer you. Offer. There's a twisted humor to it. You, the girl who used to steal apples and play soldier with the boys in the dirt, are now expected to sit beside a man old enough to remember the sweating sickness and giggle at his jokes about gout. You wonder if your body will recoil when he touches you. You hope he never does, but of course he will. Because that's the point of all this. A match isn't a dinner party. It's a transaction with consequences. You're expected to produce something, preferably sons, quickly. And if you don't, the whispers will turn venomous. People will talk about your womb like it's public property. One noble woman, barren after 3 years, was accused of sorcery. Historians still argue whether the accusation was political or sincere, but she was locked in a tower either way. Sometimes, when no one's watching, you write your name in the dirt with a stick your full name. Not the one you'll lose when you marry. You watch the wind erase it. There's a metaphor in there, but it's too bleak to name. So, you just brush your skirts and move on. You see other girls around you entering the same procession, like lambs being gently guided toward gates they don't realize will never open again. One childhood friend marries a merchant's son. She smiles like she means it. You wonder if she does. A month later, you see her with bruises on her wrists. She says she tripped. Everyone nods. You say nothing. You start practicing smiles in the mirror, the kind that look warm but not too bold, pleasant but not flirtatious, because apparently, you can scare a man off just by seeming too clever. A local priest once gave a sermon warning against shrewish wives who seek knowledge outside the home. You were 11 when you heard it. You never forgot. Now, when you read, you hide the book under your sewing. Your mother knows. She doesn't stop you, but she never encourages it either. Books won't make you a better wife. They might make you a worse one. The marriage arrangements move forward with glacial inevitability. There's a supper planned, where Sir Godfrey will make his intentions clear. Your mother sets aside her best dress for you, a pale blue thing with stiff sleeves that make your elbows ache. You wear it anyway, because on this night, you're not a person, you're a proposal. The meal is long and dull. Sir Godfrey talks about sheep prices and something he calls the female disposition. You nod politely and stare at the roast. You can feel your father's eyes on you, urging you to behave, to please, to secure this quirky tidbit. The Tudors believed a woman's emotions could be physically harmful to a man's vital spirits. Excessive weeping or sudden laughter were seen as dangerous signs of feminine imbalance. So you keep your face as blank as the stone wall behind Sir Godfrey's head. You don't cry, you don't smile, you just sit. And when the proposal comes, it's not poetic. It's not even addressed to you. It's made to your father, over wine, like a wager. Your dowry will be modest, but the girl's health appears strong, and temperament manageable. Your father agrees. They shake hands. You're excused from the room before the details are finalized. That night, you sit by the fire long after the flames die. You stare at your hands and think, absurdly, that they still don't look like a married woman's hands. You're not even sure what that means. But you know something's changed. You're no longer waiting. You're committed, and the ceremony is weeks away. You overhear someone say the banns will be read next Sunday. You feel a rush of nausea. It passes. You're told to prepare. So you begin. You learn to bake his favorite pie. You practice addressing letters to my lord. You memorize the layout of his manor from the crude sketches your mother draws from memory. You pray, not for joy, but for resilience. Because that's the Tudor bride's virtue above all endurance. Not wit, not beauty, not even chastity. Endurance. You envy the girls in fairy stories who at least get dragons to fight. Your dragon is polite, wealthy, and absolutely unstoppable. There's a moment just before dawn, 1 week before your wedding, when you wake from a dream you can't remember. You walk barefoot through the garden, dew chilling your ankles. The world is silent, still. You whisper your name aloud, one last time, into the fog. Just your name. No titles, no husband's surname, just you. It vanishes in the mist, like everything else. The morning you're told to write your wedding vows, you're handed a candle and a quill and told to make it sincere. But what sincerity is left when nothing about this was your choosing? You stare at the blank parchment for so long, the wax pools onto your sleeve. You write, finally, the same things every Tudor girl writes: to obey, to honor, to serve. You try to make the words sound beautiful, but they fight you at every stroke. You don't write what you feel because what you feel isn't allowed. You don't write about the way your chest tightens every time you think of your wedding bed. You don't write about the way your dreams have all gone quiet, like the wind has stopped blowing in your mind. Instead, you write neatly, your best script, like a girl preparing for Judgment Day, because in many ways, this is it. A man is about to become your law, your shelter, your judge, your warden, and there's not a soul on earth who would say that out loud. Your father hovers, waiting to collect the vows. He reads them, nods, then folds them without a word. His approval used to mean something. Now it just feels like a receipt being stamped. The wedding is 3 days away. The house smells like rosemary and starch. Everyone is bustling, polishing pewter and hanging garlands, but you feel like a ghost in the center of a play you can't leave. Your mother is humming. She hasn't looked you in the eyes since the banns were first read. You don't blame her. She's the one who taught you how to survive this kind of silence. And now you live in it. The local seamstress arrives to fit your wedding dress. It's your cousin's old one, modified to make it more yours. But it isn't. Not really. The bodice is too tight, the sleeves wrong, and the hem still smells faintly of lavender and something older fear. Maybe. You stand stiffly as pins bite your sides. Just breathe in, the seamstress chirps. But you can't. Not like that. One pin catches your skin and you flinch. No one apologizes. A drop of blood stains the lining where no one will see. You wonder if that's a metaphor, then decide it's too obvious to be poetic. They rehearse the wedding procession with the care of a royal funeral. You're told when to walk, when to lower your head, when to bow. You practice it over and over until the rhythm becomes muscle memory. Somewhere along the line, you stop feeling anything at all. You hear the same compliments again: how lucky you are, how handsome Sir Godfrey was in his youth, how grateful your family is for the match. You begin to nod before people even finish their sentences. Your face aches from smiling politely. One older woman pats your hand and says, "Don't worry, dear. The first time is always a bit frightening." You don't ask what she means. You already know. Now here's something strange in Tudor England. If a bride cried too much during her wedding day, it could be seen as an ill omen. So, the day before, you teach yourself not to cry. You rehearse holding your breath for long seconds until the tears recede. You press your thumb into the pad of your middle finger just to distract your body from feeling. You drink less water. It helps, sort of. You braid your hair for the last time alone that night, and each strand feels like it's slipping away into someone else's life. Yours is ending, or mutating, and what comes next will wear your skin but not your name. Wedding morning. You wake before the sun, nauseous and aching, but there's no time for softness. They wash your hair with rose water, rub your arms with oil, and powder your skin until it stops reflecting anything real. The air smells thick with incense and anticipation. The neighbor girls peek through the window as your gown is lowered over your head. One of them gasps. You want to scream. Instead, you whisper a joke under your breath about looking like a goose in satin. No one laughs. Humor is inconvenient today. The church bells begin tolling before you've had a moment to breathe. Everything becomes a blur carried through the crowd, led by a cousin holding your hem like you're royalty. Though you feel like livestock in silk, Sir Godfrey is waiting, already red in the face, his eyes squinting like he's trying to read you as a ledger. He smiles too wide. You glance once, just once, toward the door. There's no escape. You knew that already, but it's different, knowing it in your bones. The priest drones the words you've memorized holy matrimony, obedience, wifely duty. You say I do and hear it echo in your own skull like a bell struck too hard. One actual historical note, Tudor marriage vows were legally binding contracts. Not just spiritual promises, but enforceable social obligations. And if you ever broke them, say, by running away or refusing your husband's bed, your family could be fined or dishonored. Sometimes both. So when you say those words, you feel the iron behind them. They are not soft, poetic oaths. They are chains, velvet wrapped. Then the kiss. It is dry. It is quick. It is too close. The crowd claps, but it sounds far away. Someone throws petals. You flinch when one brushes your cheek. You're escorted to a feast you won't remember. Served food you can't taste. Surrounded by smiles that look like teeth. Sir Godfrey speaks loudly and often, recounting his last trip to London, the state of his tenants, his opinions on salt tax. No one interrupts him, least of all you. When you do speak, it's to thank people for coming, for blessings, for witnessing. Your voice is hoarse. No one notices. The bedding ritual comes next. Yes, that one. Tudor tradition demanded that the couple be led to their chamber by a crowd of well-wishers, sometimes even including a priest or local noble to ensure the marriage was consummated. In wealthier circles, the guests waited outside the room and sometimes even cheered when the bed creaked. You're not a noble, but your family is eager to follow custom, so you're escorted through candlelit halls, your new husband beside you, grinning like a butcher with a prize pig. You feel like your legs belong to someone else. The room is warm. The bed is too big. You don't want to lie down, but you do, because that's what's expected, because not doing it would be worse. And when the door closes, you stop being a girl. You become a wife. There are things we won't describe here, not because they're unknown, but because your body already knows enough. Suffice to say, you survive. Barely. Sir Godfrey snores beside you before you stop shaking. The candle sputters out on its own. You stare at the ceiling and try to imagine what your friend Eleanor is doing right now. Probably asleep. Probably dreaming of something quiet. You envy her. One fringe belief worth mentioning, some tutors believed a husband's temperament could be corrected by his wife's silence. That if a woman simply endured long enough, he would become gentle. You wish that were true, but you already know it's not. Because silence doesn't fix power. It only hides the bruise. The next morning, your mother greets you with a nervous smile and eyes that avoid yours. She asks if you slept well. You say yes, because that's what good wives do. They lie. The days after the wedding settle into a rhythm so unnatural, it almost feels choreographed. Like you've stepped into someone else's life with stage directions already scribbled in the margins. You wake before the sun, always before him, and lie there in the silence, watching the patterns of light creep across the walls of his manor. Not your manor. His. Even though everyone calls you Lady Godfrey now, the title tastes borrowed. You sip from his cups, walk across his rugs, and sit in his chairs. But nothing feels like yours, not even your own name. It's gone now, overwritten like a wrong sum in an old account book. When the servants call for you, they avoid your eyes. When they speak of you, they say, his wife. You don't correct them. You've learned the cost of that. Your body still aches in unfamiliar places, and the bruises, those small, unspoken trophies from your wedding night, have started to bloom in soft, secret colors along your inner thighs and hips. You try not to touch them when you bathe. You try not to think about how they happened, but they're part of you now, like freckles you never earned. You're expected to resume daily life, smiling, overseeing the kitchen, complimenting the roast goose at supper, even when your stomach knots at the smell of meat. Every interaction feels like theater. You laugh when he laughs. You nod when he talks about tenants and horseshoes and the cost of wheat. He never asks what you think. You're not sure he even knows you can think. One afternoon, while mending linens by the hearth, you hear a servant whispering about your duty, not to your husband, to the household. You're expected to be the hearth's flame, the manor's pulse. You're the emotional custodian of an entire estate. That's what marriage makes of a woman in Tudor England, not a partner, not even a servant, but a symbol. A well-maintained wife is a sign of a stable house, and your entire existence now revolves around proving his stability. You press your needle harder than necessary into the cloth and imagine its skin. You don't flinch. One fact no one really shares is that once you're married, your legal identity vanishes. Under Tudor law, a woman becomes a femme couverte, literally covered woman. Your property is his, your body is his, your voice, even in court, is not your own. You cannot make a will. You cannot sign a contract. You cannot even keep wages if you earned them. You are, by law, part of him. A detachable part, useful, replaceable. Historians still argue whether this was the root or the fruit of patriarchal law, but either way, the result is the same: you do not exist unless he allows you to. You begin marking time with seasons instead of dates. Your first frost as a wife, your first lambing season, your first feast day without your family. The world outside the manor feels distant, as if you've been buried alive inside embroidery and politeness. When you speak to the cook, she responds with kindness, but never familiarity. The housemaid gives you sidelong looks and once mutters something under her breath about girls who think they're too pretty for real work. You want to tell her that you didn't ask for any of it, but that would require a conversation, and you've forgotten how to have those. It's safer to be silent. A letter arrives from your cousin. You sneak away to the garden to read it. She's married too. Now, to a brewer's son with a fondness for puns and ale. Her handwriting is crooked and joyful. She writes about Sunday strolls and evenings by the fire. You reread it 3 times. Not because you believe her, but because you want to. Maybe she's telling the truth, or maybe she's lying in cursive. The way you smile through gritted teeth at supper. You fold the letter and hide it inside your bodice, near your heart, like a reminder that somewhere out there, another girl is surviving too. Your husband begins asking questions you dread. When will you quicken? Have your courses stopped? Should I summon the midwife? He talks about you like a farm animal that's overdue to foal. You nod and excuse yourself, but the pressure builds. Everyone watches your belly now. Not because they care about you, but because a child would mean security, succession, proof. You're not a person. You're a vessel with a timer ticking inside you. A midwife visits and pokes and prods with rough fingers, declares you healthy, plump in the right places, and smiles as if that's a compliment. You feel like an overripe fruit waiting to burst. Every morning, you dread the sight of red on the cloth. Every night, you whisper into the mattress, "Not yet. Please, not yet." Fringe belief of the day: some women, desperate to conceive, slept with a carved fertility idol under their pillow or placed sprigs of hawthorn in their underclothes. Others swallowed crushed pearls or bathed in moonlight. None of it worked. Not reliably. But desperation breeds strange rituals. You don't try any of them. Not because you aren't desperate, but because part of you, the last tiny ember of your will, doesn't want to bring a child into this. Not yet. Maybe never. But even thinking that feels like treason. You start noticing things you never did before. The way the steward flinches when Sir Godfrey raises his voice, the thin bruises on the scullery maid's arms, the fear in the cook's silence when he enters the kitchen. Your husband is not cruel, not in the dramatic, storybook way. He doesn't throw things or shout curses, but he makes everyone shrink. His presence bruises the air. He touches your shoulder and you feel your spine lock. He compliments your dress and you want to set it on fire. He calls you my dove and you dream of crows. There's something worse than violence expectation coded in civility. That's how you know you're truly trapped. He's not a monster. He's just a man with power. And in Tudor England, that's enough. You begin walking the edges of the manor grounds when no one is watching, counting your steps like they mean something. You find an old tree with initials carved into its trunk, not yours, someone else's love story, grown over with moss. You sit beneath it and press your hands into the soil, imagining you could sink into it, be swallowed whole and born again as something freer, an animal, maybe a bird, anything but this. At supper one evening, he announces that he's arranged for your younger sister to come visit. Your heart skips, a human face from the past, someone who remembers your laugh before it was filtered. She arrives with a bright ribbon in her hair and eyes wide with curiosity. You sit with her late into the night, whispering things you're not supposed to say. She asks if marriage is like the stories. You look away and say, "Some stories lie." She nods, and neither of you speak for a long time. When she leaves, she presses a small stone into your hand. "For luck," she says. You nod, unable to speak. After she's gone, you keep the stone beside your comb, touching it each morning like it might remind you who you were. The girl who climbed trees, the girl who read by candlelight, the girl who wasn't yet married. You learn quickly that feasts are more performance than pleasure. They aren't really about the food or the music, they're about appearances. And appearances, in your new world, are everything. When you walk into the great hall, hand in hand with Sir Godfrey, you smile, not because you're happy, but because everyone is watching. The steward is standing straighter. The servants are serving slower. Even the dogs seem to quiet when you enter. You're expected to greet guests like a hostess, but not speak too much. To pour wine gracefully, but not drink too freely. To laugh at your husband's dull stories, but never louder than him. It's a tightrope walk in silk slippers over a floor made of eyes. And every woman in the room has learned the same act. You see it in the way they tilt their heads, in the measured cadence of their compliments. You start to recognize it, the tremble just behind the polish, because beneath the pearls and lace, most of them are no freer than you. There's a man at the table, Lord T, who keeps asking you about children. Any little feat on the way, he smirks between gulps of wine. You smile, deflect, say something vague about time and blessings. Sir Godfrey grunts in agreement. Later that night, in your chamber, he asks you not to embarrass him again. You didn't say anything wrong, but that's not the point. The point is you didn't answer the way he wanted. You nod and promise to do better. And as he rolls over and starts to snore, you lie there tracing the patterns on the canopy, wondering how long it will take before you stop thinking in the language of escape. You soon discover that most of your married life is lived in public, even when no one else is there. The manor breathes with eyes. The maid who clears your basin is watching your appetite. The cook notices how little you eat. The washerwoman talks about the linens, what stains they carry, what they mean. Every part of your body is now evidence, and even silence is interpreted. If you're quiet, it's either dignity or sulking. If you're cheerful, you're either content or foolish. You're no longer a girl with moods, you're a wife with signals, and you're not the one reading them. The ritual of fertility follows you everywhere. A sprig of rosemary tucked under your pillow, supposedly for strength. A whispered blessing from a passing nun. A polished stone handed to you by the apothecary's wife for luck, she says with a wink. It's not that you believe any of it, but you take the stone anyway. Superstition is the only magic left when medicine is a gamble, and your choices have already been made. Your husband hires a physician to examine you. He smells like vinegar and dried mint, and he prods your belly like it's dough. He says nothing is wrong. Sometimes it just takes time. That word again. Time. As if waiting makes the silence easier. Here's something they don't put in love songs in Tudor England. If a woman didn't conceive quickly, she was often blamed, regardless of the man's health or age. And if the husband had sons from a previous marriage, the assumption was absolute. The fault must be hers. Historians still argue whether the obsession with heirs was more about legacy or control. But one thing is clear, a childless wife became a risk, and risks were rarely tolerated. You begin to fake joy more convincingly. At one feast, you even tell a joke. It's not especially funny, but the guests laugh anyway, startled and delighted by your display of charm. You can feel your husband watching you with a mixture of pride and calculation, as if weighing whether this version of you is worth keeping. Afterward, he squeezes your hand and tells you you're learning. You nod. Inside, something wilts. A visiting lady of high rank Lady Iseult arrives with her retinue. She's older, dressed in deep velvet and pearls, and carries the air of someone who's outlived every version of herself. You serve her wine and listen to her stories. She talks about court, about queens and dukes, about how appearances are more binding than law. You ask her quietly if she ever wanted anything else. She looks at you, long and steady, and says, "Wanting is for girls, surviving is for women." Then she drinks, and you both pretend it wasn't said. The longer you're married, the more you vanish, not in the tragic, theatrical way, but in slow, practical inches. You stop writing. You stop singing when no one's around. You stop wondering about the stars. Your hands become useful, and your voice becomes gentle. You remember every guest's name and how they like their tea. You never interrupt. You never cry during daylight. You begin to dream of small rebellions, letting your hair down too early, skipping morning prayers, reading a banned poem by candlelight. They're crumbs of freedom, but they're yours, for now. Quirky fact: some Tudor women embroidered hidden messages into their work's small initials, symbols, even curses sewn into the hems of garments. It was a way to speak when speech was forbidden. You begin stitching again, not because anyone asked you to, but because your fingers need to say something. You embroider a small hawk inside a rose. No one notices. That makes it feel even better. Your secret, stitched in plain sight. One evening, your husband tells you he's invited a bishop to dine. It's short notice, and the kitchen scrambles. You manage the staff, approve the menu, and adjust the table settings while keeping your composure. When the bishop arrives, he blesses the house and compliments the roast. During the meal, he talks about God's plan for marriage. You smile, your husband smiles. The bishop goes on about obedience and order, and you just nod, because what else is there to do? You've learned that people like him aren't interested in your thoughts. They want a mirror that smiles back. Later, when the fire's embers have burned low, you sit in the dark and imagine what might have been. Not dramatic things, just quiet ones. A garden of your own, a room with a lock, a friend who calls you by your old name. You run your fingers over your collarbone and try to remember the girl who once ran through fields barefoot, laughing without checking who was listening. Another letter arrives. This one from a girl you once knew only slightly Marjorie. She says she's joined a convent. She writes of silence, of prayer, of days shaped by bells and not by men. She doesn't say she's happy, but she says she's free. You reread the letter under your blanket, heart racing, afraid someone might find it. That night, you dream of cloisters and bells and stone corridors, echoing with steps that belong to no one but you. The next morning, you wake with a headache and a question pressed against your ribs. How long can you live like this? Not in years, but in meals, in prayers, in silences. How many more smiles can you fake before something cracks? And when it does, because you know it will, who will hear it? It begins with music, not the soft hum of lute strings or the drone of processional chants, but the crude, drunken kind that stumbles through the halls after supper pipes, claps, boots pounding on the rushes. It's the night of the solstice, and your husband insists on a celebration. You oblige, as you always do, because refusal is never really an option. Servants bring out mulled wine, old musicians are summoned from the village, and the hall flickers with candlelight. You wear your green velvet gown because it's his favorite. He says it makes you look earthy. You don't know what that means, and you don't ask. By now, you've perfected the art of nodding at things you don't understand. The evening stretches long, like taffy over heat. and you laugh at the appropriate moments, dance when asked, keep your back straight and your lips pleasant. It's only when the guests begin to leave, weaving home in twos and threes, that you remember what this night is really about. The bedding ritual, again, tonight, it's not just tradition, it's an expectation dressed in celebration. The steward approaches you with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes and tells you the chamber has been prepared. You nod. Of course it has. Upstairs. There are rose petals on the bed and a jug of wine on the table, though no one ever asks if you're thirsty. Your husband enters after you and bolts the door. The sound echoes. He's drunk, not clumsy, not dangerous, just full of himself in that expansive way men get when wine and ownership mix. He praises you, calls you his gift, says this is what all the years of toil were for a good manor, fine land, and a young wife with warm hands. You smile, not because it's true, but because you know what happens when you don't. And when it's done, because it always ends, eventually you lie still, his breath slowing beside you. You stare at the ceiling and think of your sister's stone, tucked beneath the pillow. You press your palm against it, hidden, like a silent tether to another life. The chamber smells of sweat and wine and violets from the bedding. You wonder if you'll conceive this time. You pray you won't. You pray you will. You don't know anymore. You fall asleep somewhere between those two prayers, mouth open, hands clenched, dreams running backward. There's a phrase the old women use in whispers. She's got the mark of a married girl. You didn't understand it before. Now you do. It's not a physical thing, not a scar or a bruise, but a change in how a woman walks, how she answers questions with the same sentence every time, how her eyes flicker before she agrees. You see it now in the women around you. In their practiced expressions and muted laughter, they recognize it in you, too. There's a quiet sisterhood in shared defeat. A few weeks later, your courses stop. You know before the midwife confirms it. Your body feels different, heavier, slower, as if preparing for a task it hasn't consented to. When the news is announced, the house erupts into a flurry of praise and preparation. Servants smile at you with sudden warmth. Your husband becomes more generous, even affectionate in public. A child means status. It means security. It means success. You become, for a moment, sacred, but only in relation to the life growing inside you. Your own worth is now tied to the heartbeat you cannot feel yet. If it falters, so might you. Historical fact in Tudor England. Miscarriage was not just a private sorrow, it was a potential scandal, especially for noble families. It could be seen as a sign of divine disfavor, of a cursed womb, or of some secret sin. There are even recorded instances where women were interrogated after miscarrying, asked about their diet, their dreams, their interactions with other men. You begin to walk carefully, avoid stairs, hold your breath when lifting anything heavier than a book, not for the child, but for your safety, your survival. You're given a wet nurse to prepare, just in case. She hovers like a shadow, smelling faintly of herbs and old milk. She never speaks unless spoken to. You wonder what her story is. You never ask. She wouldn't answer. One afternoon, as she kneads dough in the kitchen, she places a hand on your belly not to comfort, but to feel, like she's checking for ripeness. You flinch. She says nothing. You leave. As the months pass, your body shifts and the world responds. You're no longer asked to serve wine or greet guests. You are displayed, like an embroidered cushion, admired and then left alone. At first, you're grateful, then restless, then afraid. You stop writing, stop stitching. The hawk in the rose remains unfinished. You cannot bend easily anymore. Sleep evades you, food repulses you. Your thoughts begin looping, what if it's a girl? What if it's twins? What if you bleed out in the birthing bed? Like the candle that gutters beside your pillow each night. One fringe belief you overhear from the cook: if a woman births during a thunderstorm, the child will be cursed. You don't believe it, and yet, every cloud now sets your teeth on edge. You pray for fair skies and a quiet wind. Your husband grows louder, more hands-on. He speaks to your belly like it's already his heir. You wish he wouldn't. You wish it were just you and the baby. Somewhere quiet, where no one expects anything but breath. The pain begins in your 7th month, small. Sharp tugs that make you double over by the fire. The midwife says it's early movement. You know better. Something's not right. The pressure builds over days, then vanishes, then returns, then vanishes again. Until one night, the sheets bloom with blood. You're rushed from the bed, legs trembling, face pale, voices rising. Everything spins. The physician is summoned. The midwife prays. You scream once, then again, then fall into blackness. When you wake, it's morning. You're alive, but not whole. The child is gone. No one tells you directly. You read it in the stillness, in the nursemaid's downcast eyes, in the untouched cloths beside the bed. Your husband is not in the room. The midwife says, "It was not meant to be." You want to throw something, but you're too weak. So you stare at the rafters and memorize their angles, because it's the only thing that doesn't shift. Later that week, the physician tells you you might try again. Many do. His tone is cheerful, as though discussing planting seasons. You nod, because you're expected to. But inside, something has cracked, and not the child, not even the blood. Hurts as much as the moment you realize no one is mourning the same thing you are. They mourn the loss of legacy. You mourn yourself. The wet nurse is dismissed. The house quiets. You remain in bed for a week, then 2. Your husband avoids you. The servants walk lighter. You become a ghost in your own skin, floating between window and pillow, unable to decide whether you are resting or retreating. You press your sister's stone to your chest and whisper, "I'm still here." But the words feel thin. One night, you rise from bed and walk barefoot through the manor, down the servant stairs, past the cold kitchen, into the garden. The roses are black in moonlight. You kneel beside them, breathing the air, damp with fog. You think this is what it feels like to begin again, not with joy, not with clarity, but with exhaustion and defiance stitched together. You pick a petal, you crush it in your hand. It bleeds pink. You walk back inside, slowly, quietly, and you know they expect you to try again, to smile, to host, to obey, but they don't know what's growing inside you now. Not a child, something harder, wilder, something that remembers. You rise earlier now, not from duty, but from restlessness. The morning feels different, colder, less forgiving. The hearth hasn't been lit, and your slippers don't quite find their way to your feet as easily as they used to. You shuffle to the basin and stare into the warped tin mirror. You look older, not by years, but by weight. Not the kind you carry on your hips, but in your eyes. You touch your belly as if expecting to feel something still there. Of course it's gone. The child, the title of mother, the thread you were meant to follow. What's left is silence. And in Tudor England, silence is currency. It can be strength, it can be punishment, and it can be a weapon, depending on who wields it. Today, you decide to wear it like armor. Breakfast is quiet. Sir Godfrey reads a letter, grunts occasionally, drinks his ale, and doesn't look at you once. You don't mind. The less attention, the less explanation. Your body has failed him, in his eyes, even if he won't say it aloud. And failure, in this world, is a woman's greatest sin. You cut your bread too thin. The knife slips. A small cut opens across your knuckle. It bleeds more than it should. You wrap it in linen and say nothing. Later, when you remove the cloth, you find the blood has made a shape, a crescent moon, small and perfect. You keep the cloth, not out of sentiment, but because it proves you're still bleeding on your own terms. One of the housemaids mutters something as you pass her in the corridor. You don't catch all of it, but the word Baron slices through. You stop walking. She turns pale. You meet her eyes, not with anger, but with something worse, complete indifference. She curtsies, stammers an apology, and flees. You walk on, slower now, letting each step ring against the flagstones like a reply. They want you humbled. They want you grateful, but grief has burned something clean inside you. And in that emptiness, a different kind of strength begins to take root. You begin spending time in the manor's library, a dusty, neglected room your husband never enters. The books are mostly in Latin and French, faded with damp and mice, but some are in English old romances, religious texts, herbals. You pretend to be organizing them for the steward, but in truth, you read them slowly, secretly. It becomes a ritual every morning. An hour of silence and paper, words become companions. You find a passage in one book about Saint Dymphna, patron of those touched in the mind. The author calls her gentle, but fierce when cornered. You underline it, with your own blood, from the same cut. One morning, you come across a text with a loose binding. Inside, someone long before you has scribbled a note: to be silent is to vanish, to speak is to burn. You close the book and press it to your chest. The quote is not famous, not sacred, but it feels true. It feels like the thing no one says aloud in this world, where women are taught that endurance is virtue and obedience is grace. You begin to wonder what it might mean to burn. You hear whispers that your husband is taken to drinking more heavily when he visits the town. He comes back later, redder in the face, louder in the halls. Nothing dangerous, not yet. But something in his movements has changed slower, then suddenly fast, like a man pacing his own cage. One night, he grabs your wrist too hard when you ask if he's eaten. Just a squeeze, but enough to leave a mark. He kisses your forehead afterward, as if that makes it better. The bruise blooms violet by morning. You wear long sleeves. You do not explain. And yet, you still carry yourself as though nothing's happened, because in Tudor England, once married, your suffering becomes part of the wallpaper, something people politely ignore. A wife is not supposed to feel pain, only to absorb it. One of the older women in the village once said, "A good wife is like a hearth, warm and silent unless stirred." You used to agree. Now, you wonder what would happen if the hearth flared. Historical fact, the legal system of the time made it nearly impossible for a wife to charge her husband with cruelty unless he risked her life. And even then, it had to be public. Private bruises were private business. And what's more, a man's discipline was considered his right. If he beat his wife moderately, the law looked the other way. Historians still debate the thresholds of what was considered excessive, but every woman knew unless you were seen bleeding in the street, it didn't count. One evening, your sister writes again. She tells you she's betrothed. He's kind. She says, he's gentle. You want to believe her. You hope it's true. She doesn't mention the stone. You still keep it by your bed, warm from the press of your fingers each night. She asks if you're well. You stare at the question a long time. Then you write back, "I am learning to read." You don't explain what you mean. You don't need to. Around this time, the steward's wife, a plain woman with clever hands, starts visiting you in the afternoons. She pretends to teach you how to mix salves and wash linens. But really, she talks low, careful gossip, stories of other women. One, a merchant's wife, who fled in the night disguised as a boy. Another, a midwife who helped girls delay trouble with a tea made from wild plants. These aren't cautionary tales. They're maps. And for the first time, you begin to trace them. Quirky tidbit. There was a Tudor belief that rosemary under the pillow could bring prophetic dreams. You try it. Just once. That night. You dream of standing in your wedding gown, alone in the church, as flames lick up the pews around you. You do not run. You do not scream. You simply open your mouth and the fire pours out. When you wake, you smell ash. There is no fire, only your candle, burned down to the nub. You begin to alter things, subtle shifts. You rearrange the library. You start keeping a small pouch of herbs hidden beneath your mattress. You no longer bow your head when your husband speaks to you in anger. You look directly at him. It's not rebellion, not yet. It's something quieter, a refusal to shrink. He notices, he comments, "You've grown cold," he says one night. You reply, "I've grown." The pause that follows is heavy. He says nothing, neither do you. There's a feast in the manor for visiting noblemen. You wear red, No one tells you to. But the message is clear. Red is bold. Red is blood. Red is not the color of wives who wish to disappear. The steward's wife smiles when she sees you. Your husband frowns. The nobleman, Lord Halverton, kisses your hand too long. You don't flinch. You don't blush. You stare back. After the feast, the hall is silent. Your husband doesn't touch you that night. And so, you go to bed as yourself, not his, for once. The bruises fade before the memories do. They always do. Skin is forgiving, memory is not. You find yourself watching your own hands more than usual these days, as if trying to decipher what they've done to deserve this life, or perhaps what they've failed to do. The manor has grown quieter, not with peace, but with a kind of silence that hums, like a taut string pulled between two people. Your husband says less now, and when he does speak, the words are colder. Not violent, no. He still plays the part well enough to be admired, but precise, calculated. He remarks on the tilt of your head when guests speak to you. He corrects your posture in church. He praises your embroidery, then tells you which colors are more modest. The air between you is still and sharp, like glass about to crack, and you begin to understand the real cruelty of marriage in Tudor England. It isn't the pain itself, it's the way pain is dressed up in manners and prayer, and the illusion of duty, until even the victim starts to believe she's imagining it. There's a moment small, unassuming, when everything shifts. You're in the garden, inspecting the herbs, when a child passes by the outer gate. A girl, maybe 7, trailing behind her mother. She sees you and waves. You freeze. The mother scolds her, hurries her along, but that wave lingers. Something in it pierces you, reminds you that once you were that girl. Once you had the freedom to move through the world without weight, without the slow, grinding erosion of your selfhood. You go inside and cry, not because of anything specific, but because you've remembered something too precious to hold. And then quietly, invisibly, it happens. The shift, not a rebellion, not an escape, not yet, but a recalibration of self. You begin to move differently. You speak when you shouldn't, just to test the silence. You ask questions no one expects you to ask. You disagree with your husband softly, at first, then more directly, not in public, of course, but in the moments after supper, when the candles are half melted and he's too tired to raise his voice. You notice the way he stiffens, the way his jaw tightens. He's not used to this version of you. Neither are you, and that's what makes it real. Historical fact, the church preached that a woman's obedience to her husband was second only to her obedience to God. A disobedient wife, it was said, threatened not only the household but the kingdom itself. Entire sermons were written about the danger of female tongues. And you're starting to speak, not loudly, but with purpose, one syllable at a time. You begin observing the other women more carefully now, not out of envy, but curiosity. You start to see the subtle signs of resistance, tiny and brave. The merchant's wife who wears mourning black ears after her husband's death, refusing to remarry. The widow who teaches letters to girls under the pretense of catechism. The midwife who pauses, deliberately, before confirming a pregnancy, giving a woman time to change her fate. They are not loud, they are not heroes, but they are dangerous in the way only survivors can be. You wonder if you are one of them yet. One morning, the steward's wife takes your hand without explanation and presses something into your palm. A small vial. You recognize the smell: angelica root, pennyroyal, mugwort. You've heard whispers of what such mixtures can do. She says nothing. You don't ask. That night, you bury the vial beneath the rose bush, not because you're afraid of what it does, but because knowing it exists is enough. A choice, even an unused one, in this world, is a form of power. Quirky custom in some parts of England. It was believed that if a woman wore her shift inside out during a thunderstorm, her husband's wrath would be softened. You try it once. It doesn't work. But you laugh into your pillow anyway, because it feels like a prank no one can punish you for. Your husband grows suspicious. He begins asking what you do during the day, why you walk alone, why you spend time in the library. You answer calmly, evenly, with just enough truth to be dull. You've learned that boredom is your best disguise. The more predictable you appear, the less attention you draw. It's a careful game. A wrong word, a wrong look, and all the quiet freedoms you've carved for yourself could vanish. So you smile, you nod, you lower your eyes. But inside, you are already building something. A second self, stitched from resolve and ash. Then comes the bruising again, this time. Not from him, but from the way your body betrays you. A stumble on the stairs, a twisted ankle. He's not kind about it. Clumsy, he mutters, careless. He tells the cook you are to be given simpler tasks until you heal. You overhear the word fragile too many times that week. You hate it more than any insult. Fragile is the word they use before they box you up and place you on a shelf to gather dust. That same week, you hear of a woman burned for witchcraft in a neighboring shire. The charges: childlessness, moon-watching, herbal knowledge, all things that, privately, you share. It rattles you, not because you fear being burned, but because you see, so clearly now, how fine the line is between a wife and a warning. Historians still argue whether the witch trials were about fear of magic or fear of women who stopped pretending. You believe it's the latter, and that belief becomes a compass. One night, the rain beats so hard against the shutters you're convinced the roof will lift. You light a candle and sit by the window. You watch the drops streak the glass like veins. You whisper the names of every girl you've ever known who was swallowed whole by marriage. Not as a spell, not as prayer, just so someone remembers. You say your own name last, and when you do, something inside you steadies. In the following days, you begin to write again. Not letters, not prayers, just words. On scraps of cloth, on the margins of books, behind the lining of your bodice. Fragments, truths, small rebellions carved in ink. I am not his. I am still here. She was more than her womb. You hide them in places no one will find, not because you expect to be read, but because writing makes it real. At supper, you correct your husband's story, just slightly. He pauses, stares. You feel the entire room lean toward the silence. Then he laughs. The tension breaks, but you know what you did, and so does he. Later, when he brushes your shoulder a little too roughly, you don't flinch. You hold his gaze. You say nothing. He looks away first. You begin humming again, quietly, in the garden. It's not defiance, it's memory. Of a girl who used to climb trees, of a voice that wasn't always rehearsed, of a life that still lives beneath the layers of velvet and compliance. You find the cloth with a blood moon crescent again. It's stiff now, but intact. You stitch a second mark beside it, a hawk's wing. No one notices. That's the point. You are still the wife, the hostess, the listener. But now, beneath that surface, you are more, not a revolutionary. Not yet, but a crack in the stone. And someday, someone will follow that crack and find the tunnel beneath. For now, you wait, not with despair, but with precision. You wake before the sun again, but this time not from dread. Not quite. There's something else stirring a quiet rhythm beneath your skin, as if your body is beginning to remember itself after too long being someone else's. You sit up slowly, listening. The house is still. Not even the servants have begun their rustling. You move across the room and press your palm to the window pane. Cold. The kind of cold that settles in the bones. The kind that whispers, stay still. But you don't. Not anymore. You dress without ringing the bell. No help. No corset tightened by another's hand. Just you, the pale light, and the hush of winter outside the glass. The silence no longer feels like a prison. It feels like a blank page. In the weeks since your last bleeding, there's been a change not in your body this time, but in how others look at it. Your husband watches you with a cautious eye, as if you might become useful again. He asks about your appetite, your sleep. When you tell him you've had neither, he shrugs. Then perhaps God will take pity and give us a miracle. A line meant to sound pious, but you hear the edge beneath it. You nod and leave the room. You've learned that nodding is often the safest lie, but inside, You're not waiting for a miracle. You're waiting for yourself, the woman who never got a chance to become, the one who was cut down before she could speak in full sentences. You think of her often now, that version of you who believed marriage was a chapter instead of a sentence. You walk the halls of the manor like a ghost haunting her own life, brushing your fingertips against door frames, tapestries, window ledges, as if testing what remains real. Each day, you return to the library. The steward no longer questions it. Perhaps he thinks you've become devout, or perhaps he's learned not to ask questions with uncertain answers. You resume your reading, not just for escape, but for clues, patterns, warnings. There's a passage you reread over and over about Queen Catherine of Aragon, her endurance, her dignity, how she never yielded even when cast aside. The chroniclers admire her, but you don't want to be admired for patience. You want to be remembered for something else, something less respectable, something free. Historical fact, many Tudor women were praised not for what they did, but for what they didn't do. They were models of restraint, of silence, of graceful suffering. You think about that while chewing stale bread in the solar, watching a spider weave its web between the rafters. You wonder if anyone ever praised the spider, or if they simply knocked it down when they were done admiring its work. Outside, the days shorten. Winter folds the countryside into itself. You begin to walk the garden less. The herbs are dead, the air too bitter, but the cold suits you. It sharpens things, clarifies. You begin helping in the still room, brewing tonics and storing roots. The steward's wife is your companion again. She says little, but just once she places her hand over yours as you measure valerian and says, "You've changed." You look at her, surprised, and almost reply, but then you both return to your work, because some truths are best left without names. You attend Mass with the others, kneeling beside your husband, folding your hands as expected. The priest gives a sermon on obedience. Wives, submit to your husbands as the church submits to Christ. You don't flinch, you don't glare, you simply breathe. You know the other women in the pews have heard it all before. Some nod, some sigh, some stare blankly at the stone floor. You wonder how many of them are faking it. You hope most of them are. The parish begins to whisper again. A new girl has vanished, just 15, gone in the night. Rumors say she ran off with a traveling musician. Others say she drowned herself in the mill pond. The priest scolds the congregation about temptation. You remain quiet, but when you return home, you place another scrap of writing behind the fireplace grate. Just a name, Joan. Just so someone remembers she existed. Your husband grows impatient again. The kindness he fumbled after your loss has curdled back into silence. He starts spending more time away riding the grounds, hunting, drinking with merchants. At first, it feels like a relief. Then, a question. What is he doing? Who is he speaking to? One night, he comes home reeking of ale and something else, jasmine. Maybe. He says nothing. Neither do you. But you begin locking your chamber door again, just in case. And then unexpectedly, he becomes tender. He presents you with a necklace, garnets, dark as blood. He says they suit your winter skin. You smile. Accept it. Wear it once. Then, when he leaves for the market 2 days later, you bury it under the rose bush. You watch the soil fall over it like snow. It never really belonged to you. It was a leash disguised as a gift. Quirky belief, some believed garnets protected against poison and betrayal. You suppose burying them is symbolic. You like symbols. They let you say things without being accused of saying them. A letter arrives, not from your sister this time, but from a woman you barely remember, Isolde, a merchant's daughter you once shared needlework with at a harvest festival. She writes in careful, slanted ink, asking after your health, your household, your mind. And at the bottom, do you still hum when no one is listening? You feel something catch in your throat. You write back, not always, but sometimes I sing. After that, you begin keeping a small book, not for confessions, not for prayers, for truths. You write in it only when the house sleeps, only when the candle burns low. You record the names of the vanished, the silenced, the obedient. You write their imagined stories beside your real one. You don't know what you'll do with it. but writing them makes you feel less alone. One evening, a nobleman's wife visits for supper. She watches you with interest all night, asking subtle questions about your reading habits, your garden, your views on faith. At one point, she leans close and whispers, "You don't wear your sadness like the others." You laugh, not because it's funny, but because you don't know what else to do. After she leaves, you find a small note tucked into your sleeve. It says only, "We gather in spring." You burn the note, not because you don't believe her, but because you do. The days pass. The wind cuts sharper. You spend your evenings by the fire with books, with your secret journal, with your stone, the one your sister gave you, the one that still feels like a promise. You wrap it in linen and keep it tied beneath your shift now. Not for luck, for memory, for resistance. You are still a wife. You still host. You still nod. But there is a burn beneath your skin now. Slow, steady, not rage, not yet, but something older, something more patient. A truth that waits, that watches, that builds. And the next time your husband touches your arm too tightly, you don't pull away. You don't flinch. You look him in the eye and say, evenly, "That's enough." His hand loosens. He says nothing. You walk away. You do not cry. You do not smile. You light your candle. You open your book, and you begin writing again. This time, not about what has been done to you, but about what you will become. The manor becomes colder as winter deepens, not just in temperature, but in temperament. The walls seem to creak more, as if they too are weary of holding secrets. You wear heavier gowns now, not out of modesty, but for defense layers of cloth between you and the world. Sir Godfrey's mood shifts like frost on stone brittle, sharp and unexpected. He doesn't speak of the child you lost, or the child you haven't conceived. He speaks of taxes, of poor harvests, of the priest's opinion on women who linger too long in sorrow. You listen with the same blank attentiveness that's become your armor, but underneath it, you're building something more durable than silk and pretense. The silence has become yours now, not his. You use it like a blade. There are days you do not see him at all. He disappears into business or ale or boredom. The servants say nothing, but their glances have changed. They are quieter around you, more deferential. One of them, young, sharp-eyed, offers to carry your books back from the library and calls you my lady with a tone you haven't heard before. Not mockery, not fear, something closer to respect. You nod, and for a moment, you almost believe it's real. But you know better. Respect, like safety, is conditional here. It must be fed, maintained, never trusted. There's talk in the village of another death, a wife, younger than you, found at the bottom of her well. The priest calls it an accident. The women in the market don't. They say her husband was God-fearing and stern, that she lost herself. You pause at that phrase. Lost herself, like misplacing a shawl or forgetting a recipe. But you know what it really means. It means she was heard once too often, or not enough. It means she tried to live and someone found it inconvenient. You buy an extra candle that day, light it without speaking, and let it burn until morning. Historical truth, Tudor widows were in a precarious position. If they had wealth, they were pursued. If they had none, they were discarded. Some gained a sliver of freedom, but it came draped in suspicion. A widow without children, unnatural. A widow who didn't remarry, dangerous. Historians still debate whether such women were envied or feared. Likely both. You start to wonder which fate would suit you better. Your own fate, however, remains tied to the rhythms of your husband's mood. He returns one evening, sober and clipped, announcing he's invited guests for the week. Important men, he says. Connections worth keeping. You nod. You ask what you should prepare. He names dishes you've never cooked and expects them without error. You say you'll manage. He nods, already dismissing you. That night, you press your journal flat and write only one sentence: "I will not serve what poisons me." It makes no sense yet, but you write it anyway. The guests arrive. 3 men and a wife. The wife is young, nervous, constantly adjusting her sleeves. You catch her watching you, Not with curiosity, with desperation. You recognize that look. It's the look of someone trying to remember who she was before she became polite. You offer her wine before she asks. She drinks too quickly. You refill her glass. Neither of you says anything meaningful, but she follows you with her eyes for the rest of the evening. At supper, the men talk over the food, trade, laws, King Henry's latest whims. You chew slowly and say nothing. The young wife attempts to speak once. Her husband corrects her. You see her smile falter, then recover. You place your napkin neatly beside your plate. That night, you slip a note into the young wife's pocket as you pass her in the corridor. It says you are not alone. You will never know if she reads it. That is not the point. You wrote it. That is enough. The days pass like breath held too long. You plan meals, you manage servants, you host with precision, but behind every task is a thrum, an awareness of something rising, a stirring inside you that no longer fears exposure. You begin to ask bolder questions in private. Why are accounts missing from the ledgers? Why are the stable boys unpaid? Why is the priest allowed to decide who mourns? Your husband frowns. He tells you to mind your place. You nod. Then you ask again. This time, in front of the steward. A new rumor spreads quietly, like a draft under a door, that you're not quite right since the miscarriage, that you've become peculiar. The baker's wife says you read too much. The priest says you walk too far alone. A merchant calls you ice-eyed. You collect each phrase like a token. They are not insults. They are warnings, proof that you are beginning to ripple the surface of their still little pond. You feel no shame, only momentum. Quirky local belief, a woman who speaks too much in winter will bring storms. You read it in a book on folk traditions. You smile. Then you speak twice as often the next week. When a storm does come, you stand in the garden and let the rain fall down your sleeves. It feels like a baptism, not of faith, but of refusal. Your husband confronts you 2 nights later. You've changed, he says. People notice. You meet his eyes, then let them. His face darkens. He steps closer. You don't flinch. For the first time, he hesitates. Just enough. The next day, he leaves for town again. He does not tell you when he'll return. You don't ask. In his absence, the manor breathes easier. The servants are quicker with their jokes. The steward whistles again. You begin inviting the neighbor women for tea quietly, respectfully. You talk about weather, herbs, wool. Then you talk about books, about names, about the girl in the well, about what women do to endure. You do not call it a meeting, but it feels like one. You begin writing more deliberately, less diary, more doctrine. You rewrite church prayers into something softer. You write lists of names, women who once lived here, what they survived, what they didn't. You stitch some of the names into your old underskirts. If they find them, they will not understand. If they don't, the names still breathe. When your husband returns, he is quiet. You're colder. He notices, but he says nothing. You do not fight. You do not flinch. You do not offer warmth he hasn't earned. He eats. He drinks. He leaves your chamber untouched. You light your candle. You open your book. You write, I am the steward of my own mind. He watches you more after that. You feel it, but you're no longer afraid. Let him watch. Let him wonder what you've become. You still wear your ring. You still say grace. You still serve his guests. But every act is a choice now. Every nod a performance. Every silence a line in a script you are secretly rewriting. You have become something he cannot name. And that, finally, is power. You rise with the frost curling at the corners of the windows. The air so still you can hear the cinders cracking faintly in the hearth. The gown you pull over your shoulders is plain, unadorned wool. The kind servants wear on cold days, but you choose it deliberately. You no longer dress to impress. You dress to vanish, or to sharpen, depending on what the day requires. In the mirror, your face has narrowed slightly, not from hunger, but from clarity. You have become your own witness, and you understand now that in Tudor England, a woman's greatest skill is her ability to disappear in plain sight while still pulling the threads of her own design. Whether you are queen or laundress, The gown is only a costume, the smile only a tactic. The game is survival, and you have learned how to play it with precision. Outside the manor walls, another woman has been accused of heresy, a merchant's widow this time. They say she questioned a priest, that she spoke of the Virgin in ways too bold. They say she refused to kneel. You hear the rumors over bread with the steward's wife. She doesn't say much, just peels the crust slowly and mutters, "They don't like us thinking." You nod, because it's not just religion that's dangerous, it's the idea of a woman having any conviction that wasn't handed to her by a man. You've begun to understand why widows are both feared and pitied. Without a man, a woman's words are seen as loose things untethered, and therefore capable of slipping into magic or madness. And without children to soften her silhouette, she becomes something unnatural, a question with no answer. You dream, sometimes, of becoming a widow. It frightens you that the thought feels less like grief and more like relief. In your dreams, you wear black, but it isn't mourning attire, it's armor. You walk through town with your veil lifted and your hands bare, and people move for you like waves around a rock. When you wake, you lie still for a long time. Clutching the stone your sister gave you, you do not feel shame, only a kind of distant longing, like watching a candle flicker in a window too far away to touch. Your husband is changing again. He's become cautious, not outwardly cruel, but watchful, uncertain of you. He reads your expressions like scripture, looks over your shoulder when you write, asks what you speak about with the kitchen maids. You give him nothing. You speak plainly. You offer no warmth, no disobedience. You become air quiet, essential, invisible when necessary. He wants the version of you that smiled at feasts and trembled in the dark. That girl is gone, and the woman you're now offers him only surface. Historical truth, even queens were not immune to suspicion. Elizabeth Thatis. I refused marriage her entire reign, and though celebrated by some, many whispered she was unnatural, unfeminine, perhaps even bewitched. A woman alone in power was always seen as suspect. You read about Elizabeth often now, her rituals, her strategies, her mirror games. You admire her, not for her rule, but for her refusal to be ruled. You whisper her name like a blessing when the house is quiet. Elizabeth, Virgin, Flame. You begin to keep lists, not of chores or inventories, but of women. Every woman you've known since childhood, where they ended up, who they married, how they lived, who they became. You write them in code, then hide the scraps in a hollowed-out candle mold in the storage room. If found, they would mean nothing, but to you, they are sacred, an altar of the unremembered. Some names have no stories, only questions. Agnes, gone. Cecily, married a butcher. Margaret, lost in childbirth. You write them anyway, because not writing them would be another kind of loss. Your sister writes again. Her letter is shorter this time. She's married now. He's kind. She says, they live near the sea. She writes of gulls, of bread warm from the oven, of quiet. But something in her tone is thinner, like parchment stretched too tight. At the bottom, she asks if you've thought of visiting. You stare at that question for a long time. Then, with a sharp breath, you write back soon. That word soon echoes in you for days. You start to prepare, quietly. You gather coin from places your husband never checks, inside the seam of a winter cloak, behind the false bottom of a drawer, tucked within the folds of a torn bodice. You save a crust of bread each day. You map the nearest path to the coast, not on paper, but in memory. You learn the names of the stables, who feeds the horses, who might look away if asked. You aren't ready yet, but soon. One evening, your husband calls for you. You haven't been summoned like this in weeks. You enter the hall, and he's standing near the hearth with a letter in his hand. His expression unreadable. You've been writing, he says. Not a question. You nod. To whom he asks. You meet his eyes and reply to myself. He stares, waiting for more. You offer none. Eventually, he turns and throws the letter into the fire. You watch it curl into ash. You do not react. That night, you bolt your chamber door again. There's a guest who arrives the following week, an older woman, draped in dark fabric, with eyes like frost. She's no one's wife, a cousin of someone, a wanderer. She carries with her a kind of stillness you haven't seen in anyone before. During supper, she says very little, but afterward, as you pour wine near the fire, she touches your wrist and says, "You're not broken. You're folding. Soon, you'll be sharp again." You don't know if she's mad or holy, but you believe her. And that night, you sleep soundly for the first time in years. Quirky superstition folding knives under the bed was said to ward off nightmares and unwelcome spirits. You do it, not because you believe it works, but because you like the feel of the blade near you, hidden, ready. A storm rolls in by the end of the week. Heavy rain, bitter wind, shutters clapping like warnings. Your husband rides out anyway to town, he says. You watch from the window, arms folded, candlelight flickering behind you. The moment he disappears into the gray, you walk to your room, pull up the floorboard, and check your things. Coin, the stone, a cloak, a worn map, traced by memory. You exhale, still not yet. But closer, that evening, you write again. Not a diary, not a list, a letter. But this one you won't send. It begins. To the girl I was, thank you for not dying when you wanted to. You fold it, tuck it between the pages of your herb book, and go to sleep with ink still on your fingers. The next morning, there's frost on the windows again. You smile when you see it. The kind of smile that means something's coming. The thaw comes slowly, a drip from the eaves here, a patch of bare earth by the garden wall there. You walk the grounds with your cloak drawn tight and your thoughts tighter. Beneath the hard soil, something has begun to stir, not just in the roots, but in you. You sense it every time you pass the closed gate, every time you touch the stone hidden in your bodice, every time you trace, in your mind, the route to the coast your sister wrote about. You've never spoken of escape aloud, not once, not even to yourself. But now it breathes beneath your ribs like a secret animal waking from hibernation. Not wild, not reckless, just patient, waiting for its moment. The villagers are talking again. A girl barely 14 has been wed to a man nearly 4 times her age. The wedding was quiet. The feast was forced. You saw her once, afterward, outside the church. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She looked like a candle that had burned too long. Her name was Marion. You write it down later, in your little book of names. Marion, wife at 14. You draw a small line beside it, like a tally. You no longer count your days in hours. You count them in girls. In the manor, things remain unchanged on the surface. Your husband comes and goes, sullen, self-important. He avoids you now more than he confronts you. The distance suits you both. When he does speak, it's about bills, servants, the price of timber. He doesn't ask what you're reading. He doesn't ask why you no longer wear the garnet necklace. He pretends not to notice that you sing more often now, quietly, while walking alone or kneading bread in the kitchen. But you know he hears. You let him hear. It's not defiance. Not yet. It's declaration. You are still here. At market, you buy herbs no one expects, bitter ones, dark ones women usually avoid unless they have a reason. You mix them with lavender and peppermint and say they help you sleep. The apothecary does not ask questions. His wife, however, raises an eyebrow and offers you a pinch of something extra for clarity of mind. You take it, not because you need it, but because now even silence is being interpreted. You've become a riddle to them, a wife who doesn't grieve like a widow, a woman who doesn't tremble like a wife. You make people nervous, and nervous people don't interfere. It's a strategy you intend to sharpen. Historical detail in Tudor society: a woman could not legally own property if married, but a widow could. That thin veil between captivity and control became the basis of countless whispered arrangements, suspicious deaths, and cautious survival. Some widows remarried immediately, others refused. The ones who remained single too long were sometimes called witches, sometimes saints. You've begun to imagine yourself among them, not yet widowed, but learning the weight of independence in the pockets of your own thoughts. A letter arrives, this time from the sea, from your sister, salt-stained and smudged. It smells faintly of smoke and ink. She writes of gulls nesting early, of tides turning late, of a man who listens more than he speaks. But mostly, she writes of quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't watch you. She says, you read that line 3 times, then once more before bed, you don't write back immediately. Not because you don't want to, but because you want to do it right. Words matter now. They always did, but now they weigh more. Your hands have grown calloused from work, real work. You've started doing more in the kitchens, not from obligation, but control. You choose the spices, the timing, the temperature. You know exactly how long it takes to boil water, to roast a hen, to cool a broth. You could teach a class if you were allowed to speak in that way. You learn which servants listen, which repeat. The steward's wife is still your ally, though neither of you has named the alliance. One afternoon, while grinding cloves, she murmurs, if you leave, leave well. You meet her eyes. She doesn't look away. Neither do you. In the church, the priest preaches about the dangers of idle women. A house unruled is a house unraveled. He warns. You sit in the pew, hands folded, face composed. You want to laugh, not cruelly, just knowingly, as if to say, you're already too late. But instead, you bow your head and whisper the words that everyone else mouths without meaning. When the sermon ends, you stay behind. You light a candle for no one in particular, and as it flickers, you think of Marion, of Cecily, of Joan, of the girl in the well, of your unborn child, of your mother, and maybe, for a moment, of yourself. Your husband grows ill, not gravely, just enough to make him quieter, softer, more irritable. He complains of headaches, of cold limbs, of strange dreams. The physician says it's nothing. The priest says it's God. The steward says nothing at all. You prepare his meals more carefully now, not because you plan anything, but because attention, once noticed, cannot be withdrawn. You stir the broth clockwise. You sprinkle thyme into the stew. You cut the bread thicker on days when he sleeps longer. It becomes a ritual, a rhythm, a test. Quirky custom some Tudor wives were said to control their husband's health, with small acts, salt misplaced, boots uncleaned, windows left ajar. Little things that never drew blame but slowly shifted balance. You've taken note. You leave his boots where they're harder to reach. You move his wine slightly out of reach on the shelf, not to harm him, to see if he notices. He doesn't. Not yet. You write your sister at last. The letter is short. If I come with silence, and a name that is no longer his. You don't explain. You don't say when. You fold it carefully and seal it with wax from the candle you light every night. You take it to the market yourself and hand it to the merchant who travels to the coast. He knows nothing. You say little. The coin you give him is smooth from being handled too often. He nods, and that's enough. You begin preparing in earnest, not with haste, with method. You map your exit in the language of chores, which cupboard creaks, which door holds, which servant sleeps deepest. You collect a second cloak, dull gray, nondescript. You begin tucking dried bread into its sleeves, wrapped in cloth soaked in oil so it won't mold. You gather a bit of thread, a needle, a knife no longer used in the kitchens. You pack it all into a bundle, then unwrap it, repack it, and do it again. You are rehearsing your own resurrection. Then something unexpected. Your husband, one evening, asks you to sit beside him. You do. He doesn't touch you. He doesn't speak. He just looks at you for a long time, as if trying to locate the woman he once purchased. He doesn't find her. You see it in his eyes. Finally, he says, "You've grown cold." You reply, "I was warm once." That ends the conversation. The next day, he departs again. You do not ask where. You do not care. That night, you open your book, the one hidden in the hearthstone cavity. You read every name aloud, not as mourning, not as history, as memory. Then you write one more mine, not as And beside it, for the first time, you write the day's date, the day before spring begins. The morning of spring's arrival comes quietly, without fanfare, as if the world is too tired to celebrate. There's no birdsong yet, only the dull drip of thawing snow from the eaves and the low groan of timber stretching in the rafters. You rise as always, before the servants, before the light touches the panes, and you move like a shadow across the floor, pulling your cloak around you not because of the cold, but because today, you're no longer dressing for the house. Today, you are dressing for departure. You reach beneath the bed and retrieve the bundle bread wrapped in linen. Your stone, the map, the cloak, the knife, the hidden coin. You do not hesitate. You do not tremble. It all fits beneath your arm like it always did in your rehearsals. Only this time your breath does not catch in your throat. This time your body knows it is real. You are leaving. But first ritual, not religious, not prescribed. Your own. You walk to the hearth, open the cavity behind the stone where your little book waits, and remove it. You flip to the last page. Your name. The date. You draw a single line beneath it. No flourish, just finality. Then, one by one, you tear out the pages, not to destroy them, but to carry them. You fold them small, slide them into your bodice, flat against your heart, not as weight, as reminder. These women will come with you, even if they never left the rooms that broke them. Their names will travel, and in that, they will breathe again. You listen. The house is still. You know its rhythms. The steward sleeps late on Sundays. The cook is in the cellar preparing pickling jars. The maid who minds the front gate is slow to stir, often drowsy with honey wine if she found the hidden bottle in the kitchen. You wait. Let the house lull itself deeper into the lie of another ordinary day. Then, barefoot, you descend the back staircase, silent as dust. You don't use the front entrance. You never meant to. Instead, you cross through the storage hall, where linens hang from beams, and you slip out the low servant door no taller than a child's shoulder. It sticks, as you knew it would, but only slightly, enough to make you feel the truth of this exit. You press through. Outside, the air is sharper than you expected. Not cruel, just honest. It bites your cheeks, pinches your fingers, but you welcome it. You pull your cloak close and begin walking not toward the main road, but into the woods beyond the stables, where no one looks unless a horse goes missing. You move fast at first, then slow yourself. You cannot run. Not yet. That is for later. Now is for precision. For the path through the trees marked only by memory and instinct. You've walked it enough in your thoughts that your feet already know where to land. You walk for hours. The earth is soft beneath you, sodden with melt. Branches snag your sleeves, thorns catch your hem. But you do not stop. You do not curse. This, too, is part of the leaving. You emerge near the edge of the lower pasture, close to the village, but not inside it. The barn is your goal, not because it offers shelter, but because inside, there's a girl. Her name is Tamsin. She brushes horses at dusk, and once, months ago, you gave her a handkerchief when her nose bled from the cold. She never forgot. When you knock on the side panel, she doesn't flinch. She just looks up and says, "You came." You nod. She steps aside. Inside, she gives you a heel of bread, a cup of water, and a name of man who drives salt carts to the coast, who won't ask questions if paid. He leaves at sundown. Tamsin will show you where. You eat without speaking. Then you take out the coin and press it into her hand. She tries to refuse. You close her fingers around it. For the next girl, you whisper. She nods. The two of you sit in silence until the sun begins to lower behind the hills. Historical pattern: hundreds of women vanished from their villages during the Tudor period, recorded only as runaways, fallen, or lost. Some were found. Some were dragged back. Some were never named again. But among them were the ones who made it, who became someone else, somewhere else. Historians still argue what drove them: violence, hunger, the ache of confinement. But the record never captures the full truth. Sometimes it was not fear, but clarity, that made them go. You hide in the shadow of the trees while Tamsin leads the driver to you. He is older, silent, with skin like bark and eyes like stone. He grunts, glances at the coin, nods. You climb into the back of the cart, between sacks of coarse salt wrapped in wool. He doesn't speak. You're grateful. The road jerks beneath you, a rhythm unlike anything in the manor. You lie back, staring at the sky through a gap in the cart's slats. The stars are not visible yet, but you feel them waiting. The road winds for hours. Night falls, the cold grows bolder. You wrap your cloak tighter, press the stone against your chest, and listen to the creak of the wheels, the crackle of hooves on dirt. You think of the journal, of the names, of the house you left not as a ruin, but as a cage, and you do not regret it, not even when the wind slices through the cart's edges, not even when your fingers go numb, not even when the ache of not knowing what lies ahead presses against your spine like another weight. You would rather starve in motion than feast in stillness. You arrive before dawn, a coastal town, gray, asleep, slouched against the sea like a drunkard. The man says nothing, just points. You climb down, stiff, silent. You nod. He turns the cart around. You're alone, but not afraid. You walk the edge of the docks until the first boats creak into view. Fishermen, traders, wind-bitten boys with red noses and strong hands. You watch, wait, then there, a figure by the crates, a girl with wind-tangled hair and a ribbon around her wrist. Your sister. She sees you and does not cry. She simply walks forward and pulls you into her arms. Tight, breathless. I knew you'd come, she says. You don't reply. Your throat is too full. Not of sorrow, of air. Later, she brings you inside. A small cottage, low beams, warm bread, a window that faces the sea. You sit, you eat, you sleep for a day and a night without dreaming. Quirky truth, some women who fled their marriages in the Tudor era changed their names to match saints or seasons. You choose no name yet, but in your sister's home, when asked who you are by the old neighbor, you smile and say, "No one's wife." The woman nods, says nothing more. That night, you unpack your journal, unfold each page, lay them on the table like prayer. Your sister helps you pin them to the wall, one by one, the names, the marks, the stories. You don't mourn what you left. You don't forget it either. It is not a shadow behind you. It is the fire that lights your way. And in this new place, with salt in your hair and ink on your hands, you begin again. Not as a bride, not as a wife, as a woman who walked out of history and wrote her own. The salt air clings to everything, your skin, your hair, even the folds of the worn shift you now wear every day. It's different from the stale damp of the manor. This scent is wild, alive, filled with motion. At first, the sound of the waves kept you awake at night, their crashing too unpredictable after so many years of silence and control. But now, you sleep with the window slightly open, letting the rhythm of water replace the rhythm of footsteps you once trained yourself to hear in the corridors. Each wave is a reminder that you are not being followed, that no one is pacing just beyond your door, that your breath belongs to you now, not your husband, not your station, not the stifling rhythm of the liturgical calendar, just you. Your sister gives you space. She doesn't ask about what happened, nor does she explain how she knows to keep her voice soft and her eyes steady. She just leaves a fresh loaf on the table each morning, folded cloths near your cot, and enough room in her quiet cottage for you to remember how to take up space again. You begin to move differently, at first slowly, with the uncertainty of someone unused to not being watched, but soon, more freely. You find yourself humming again, louder this time, sometimes even with the window wide open. You dig your fingers into the earth behind the cottage and plant things not because you know what will grow, but because the act of planting feels like writing a letter to your future self. The village is small, unassuming. It doesn't ask questions unless you invite them. The neighbors nod politely. One old woman even offers a slice of seaweed-wrapped bread as a kind of peace treaty. The baker's apprentice watches you with curiosity, not suspicion. They don't know your name, not the one you ran from. You introduced yourself simply as Eleanor, a name soft on the tongue, like something found in a song. Not a lie, not the truth, just a possibility. And here, that's enough. You're not required to explain how you arrived. Your presence is not currency or scandal, it is simply noticed, and then accepted. Historical fact, many women who escaped their marriages in the Tudor period settled in port towns, where identities could blur, and newcomers were common. The sea offered both escape and erasure. A place to vanish, yes, but also to begin. Some became midwives, weavers, ale sellers. A few even disguised themselves as men, joining crews and vanishing into the mist of salt and sail. Historians still argue how many were found, how many returned, how many chose to remain ghosts to their past lives. You think of them often now, not as lost, but as scattered seeds the wind carried far from familiar soil. Your hands remember work. You begin helping your sister mend nets, gut fish, carry buckets. The smell is terrible at first, but even that becomes something you accept, like everything else. It's a form of proof. You're alive, you're useful. No one touches you without asking. No one raises a voice when a task goes wrong. There's laughter here, too. Not the brittle kind that accompanies noble conversation, but the deep, unpretty sort that leaves tears in the corners of eyes. You learn to laugh again, not as a tactic, as relief. One morning, your sister asks if you want to visit the chapel, not the kind with stained glass and sermons, but a tiny stone room with a thatched roof and a single candle always burning. You hesitate. You have not prayed since the night you wrote your name beneath the last, but something in you aches to sit in silence again, not the silence of obedience, but the silence that asks nothing of you. You go, and inside, you do not kneel. You sit, you close your eyes, you breathe. You do not ask for forgiveness. You do not offer praise. You just exist. And for the first time in what feels like centuries, you feel no guilt for that. You take up writing again. Not the names this time, though you still know them by heart. This time you write small scenes. A woman walking through a snow-covered orchard, a girl laughing as she hangs laundry, a widow who lives alone, with no one to please but herself. Fiction, maybe. Memory, maybe not. You don't try to label it. You just write, at first, on scraps. Then, in a notebook, the apothecary's wife gives you, wrapped in blue cloth. You've got the hands of a story keeper, she says. You thank her. That night, you fill 5 pages without stopping. Quirky custom, it was believed that sea air cured melancholy. Doctors prescribed coastal retreats for female vapors, hysteria, and sorrow that could not be explained. You wonder if it's true. All you know is that here, you no longer dream of drowning. You dream of firelight, of long walks, of a quiet table where no one interrupts. You even begin to sleep through the night. Not always, but often enough to remember what it feels like to wake without dread. Then, one afternoon, the first letter arrives, delivered by a trader from inland, handed to your sister by accident. The handwriting is unmistakable sharp, formal, lined like a dagger. Your husband's. The letter is not addressed to you. It is addressed to the local magistrate. In it, he requests news of a runaway wife, fair-skinned, dark-haired, unsound of mind. The words are carefully chosen, measured, poisoned. Your sister hands you the letter without speaking. You read it, once, then again. Then you place it into the fire without ceremony. For the first time in months, you feel fear again, but not like before. Not the freezing, choking kind. This fear is lucid, controlled. You meet your sister's eyes. He won't find me, you say. She nods. But you both know it's a risk now. You must be careful. You must move faster. You begin to make plans. You gather more coin. You speak with the apothecary about places farther down the coast. You learn which boats sail south and which crews look the other way for a price. You pack lightly your journal, your stone, your name stitched into the hem of your shift. Just Eleanor. Nothing else. You say goodbye to the sea before you leave. Not tearfully. Just with one hand dipped into the water. A silent pact between you and the salt. The next town is smaller, more windswept, but less known. You rent a room above a cooper's shop. You work quietly, stitching for the fishwives, preparing herbs. The women begin to trust you. One calls you wise. Another calls you witch. Neither insults you. You like both. You hear nothing more of the letter. Whether the magistrate responded, whether your name was passed to the next village, none of it matters now. You've gone farther than he can follow. Even if he were to find you, he would not recognize what you've become. You walk by the shore each morning now, stones in your pockets and ink on your fingertips. You are not married. You are not anyone's. You are not waiting for permission to breathe. You are, at last, living in a world you built with your own hands, and no one can take that from you. The days are longer here. That's what you notice first, not just because of the sun, which now hangs low and golden over the sea well into evening, but because time itself stretches differently when no one owns you. You wake with no bell, no summons, no voice beyond your own whisper. You dress in simple linen, not to please but to move. You eat when you're hungry, not when the clock strikes. You walk not in measured paths behind a husband's stride, but in circles, zigzags, wherever your feet take you. The freedom is quiet, not dramatic. There's no trumpet of triumph, just breath, just steps, just a kind of softness you never knew your body could hold. You begin to forget how you used to fold your hands in your lap to keep them from trembling. Now they move without fear. They braid herbs, pour oils, lift baskets. They do not ask permission. The cottage you rent is small, one room, a hearth, a bed, a writing table, but it's yours. Entirely. No one knocks without reason. No one owns the key but you. That alone feels like sorcery. You remember how in the manor, you used to flinch at footsteps outside your door. Now, silence means peace, not tension. At night, you leave the window ajar and listen to the sea muttering secrets in its sleep. You've learned its rhythms, the way it withdraws before roaring back, like a woman who knows when to retreat and when to rise. You write beside that window now, your fingers ink-stained, your pages scattered like feathers. Your words are no longer whispers. They are full-voiced, unashamed, stitched with names and memories and moments that no longer hurt when written. Each sentence you craft becomes another route anchoring you deeper into the life you chose. People begin to notice you, but differently now. They don't look at you with concern or pity. They ask for help. They offer trade. A woman with 3 children asks if you can brew something for her nightmares. A sailor brings you a bundle of sea lavender to thank you for curing his wife's cough. The village doesn't know your whole story, and they don't need to. What they see is a woman who knows what to do with her hands and her voice. You are no longer a mystery. You are a presence. There's power in that one you've learned to wield not through force, but through care. Historical detail in some port towns. Women served unofficially as healers, matchmakers, and midwives without sanction from the church. Often, these women were those who had stepped outside traditional roles. Widows, runaways, those with no surviving family. They walked a fine line between necessity and suspicion. You walk that line now, but with balance. You keep your circle small. You give just enough to be trusted, but never enough to be cornered. You've learned the weight of every word you speak. Some truths are gifts, others are grenades. You know the difference now. You write to your sister again, this time with a steady hand and a firmer voice. You tell her you're well, that you live near cliffs where gulls cry and herbs grow wild in the cracks. You tell her you've begun teaching a girl to read Lise, 12 years old, quick-witted, curious, always barefoot. You say nothing about your husband, and she doesn't ask in return. She writes back once more, just 3 words. You are free. You cry, just a little, when you read that, but the tears do not feel like breaking. They feel like cleansing. You've stopped marking time by the church calendar. You no longer note the feast days, the fasts, the saints. Your calendar is weather and light and sound. The day the swallows return, the evening when the waves turn blue instead of gray, the morning the first fishwife shouts your name from the path below. That is how you count your days now, not in penitence, but in presence. One dusk, A traveler from inland passes through and stops at your door. He has the bearing of a man who's used to doors opening for him. He asks for water, for food. You offer both. He talks too much, watches too closely. As he leaves, he pauses in the doorway and says, "You remind me of someone I once knew." You smile, cool as sea glass. Many of us do. He doesn't press. He walks away. You close the door and bolt it gently. Not out of fear, out of ritual. A new girl appears in the village 2 weeks later. Pale, raw-eyed, shaking. She says little, carries less. You recognize it instantly, that look. The look of someone trying not to vanish. You bring her bread without asking. You offer her your spare shawl. Slowly, she speaks. A name, a place, a wound. You don't try to fix her. You just say, "You can stay." And she does. She sleeps by the hearth for 3 nights. Then she takes a job at the docks mending nets. One evening, she hands you a small seashell, ridged and pink. You keep it in your pocket. A reminder the cycle continues. Quirky lore in some coastal communities. It was said that seashells collected by women carried the voices of those they could not protect. You begin to gather shells now, not out of superstition, but solidarity. Each one sits on your windowsill, a silent testament to the women who didn't escape. You name them silently as you place them: Joan, Marion, Cecily. You no longer grieve them with tears. You honor them with action. Your journal is nearly full. The pages are worn, some smudged with salt, others speckled with candle wax. You've begun writing a new one. This time, not hidden. It sits on your table, beside your herbs and cloth, openly acknowledged. Visitors see it. No one dares ask what's inside. The girls you teach sometimes flip through the back pages and giggle at your drawings, small sketches of the village, of plants, of ships. You let them. They are too young to understand the weight those pages carry. And that's how it should be. You carry the weight so they don't have to. A letter arrives from inland, not from your husband, from someone else, a solicitor. It informs you that Sir Godfrey has died suddenly. No heirs. It's written in that impersonal legal tone that turns lives into lines on a ledger. You read it once. Then you place it on the table and stare at it until the ink begins to blur. You feel no joy, no grief, only stillness, like a chapter closing not with a period but with silence. Later, you burn it. The ashes scatter across your garden, settling between the mint and thyme. You do not mark the date. You don't need to. The next day, you return to your routines. You teach Lise to read the word freedom. You press lavender into a pouch for a woman with an aching head. You patch a boy's torn shirt. You walk to the cliffs and sit beside your shells. And that night, as you blow out the candle, you whisper the final name into the dark. Your own, not as property, not as a page in his story, not as someone who was almost remembered, but as the woman who remembered herself and never stopped walking. There's a shift in the village after the letter burns, though no one but you knows it. The light doesn't change. The waves don't speak any differently, but something in your step becomes weightless, and the corners of your mouth curve without needing to be told. You walk to market without the usual guard drawn over your shoulders. You pause longer by the lemon cart, just to feel the firmness of the fruit under your fingers. You no longer brace yourself when someone says your name. You don't wonder who might be asking, or who might be watching, because now your name is your own. Eleanor, spoken softly, carried like a talisman in the mouths of the girls you teach and the women you brew for. It no longer echoes against walls that never listened. Now it settles into the air like something that belongs. Spring has bloomed hard and sudden. The trees behind your cottage wear fresh green like gowns meant for celebration, and you take to the cliffs each morning to sit beside your growing row of shells. You touch each one before you begin your day, fingers grazing their ridges like rosary beads. Though you haven't said a church prayer in months, not because you've lost faith, but because you've found something quieter to believe in. A different kind of grace, one made not from pulpits, but from survival. You kneel still, but now. It's to plant seeds, to untangle thread, to soothe crying children. You kneel with purpose, not obligation. You've started a new project. A second book, not secret, not hidden. This one begins not with names of the dead, but stories of the living, of the girls who come each evening to your cottage with wide eyes and quiet questions, of the mother who learned how to poultice her son's fever on her own, of the sailor's daughter who now brings you scraps of paper to help her write letters. You write about their small triumphs, their unnoticed bravery. You write about yourself too, not the woman you were, but the one you are. Not as confession, not as apology, but as fact. Historical truth records of women's lives in Tudor England often vanish after marriage. Once a name changed, once the husband signed the deed, she slipped from the page unless she bore sons or scandal. You were almost one of those vanishing points. Now you write yourself back in, line by line, until the ink becomes a kind of spine. And when the children ask you why you write so much, you say, because stories told in secret die in silence. They don't understand yet, but they will. One morning, a stranger arrives in the village, not in search of anyone just passing through, as far as anyone can tell. A thin man with sharp eyes and a broken shoe. He stops at the tavern, he eats, he leaves, but he looks at you just a moment too long as you pass him by the well. You feel the weight of his glance settle between your shoulders like an old coat. That night, you sleep with a knife under your pillow again, not from fear, from memory, from the knowledge that peace is a thing you build daily, not inherit once. You wake before dawn and check the door, still bolted, still yours. The next week, the priest pays a visit. You don't attend his services anymore, and he's noticed. He stands outside your cottage, hat in hand, lips pursed. I worry for your soul, he says. You smile gently. I don't, you reply. He speaks of duty, of redemption, of the dangers of a woman's mind left ungoverned. You offer him tea. He refuses. He leaves. That evening, you pen a new passage in your book. They only come for you when you've stopped asking for their blessing. You begin hosting weekly gatherings. Just women. No title. No formality. Sometimes you read aloud from your book. Other times, they tell stories about their mothers, their first bruises, their quiet victories. You listen. You do not correct. You do not guide. You simply make space. It's strange how powerful that feels. A room where no one interrupts. A circle where no one belongs to anyone but themselves. One of the girls, Lisa, brings you a gift. A small wooden box she carved herself, uneven but careful. Inside it, a feather. It reminded me of you, she says, like something that fell but still floats. You keep it by your bed, beside the shell your sister once sent. You begin to dream again, but differently now. No longer of flight or fire or locked doors. You dream of stone paths and candlelight, of your hands weaving, mending, writing, of women laughing around tables without men, of silence that doesn't press, but holds. You receive a letter, months after the last, from a name you barely remember. Isolde, the merchant's daughter from long ago. She's heard of you, through traders, through gossip, through the slow whisper of women's mouths that carry names like spells. She writes, I never knew we were allowed to leave. Thank you for showing me we could. You cry when you read it, not because you are sad, but because sometimes being believed by another woman is the truest form of prayer. Quirky tradition, it was once said that if a woman carved her name into a wooden beam of her home, it would outlast her voice. One evening, you take your knife and, without ceremony, etch Eleanor into the beam above your hearth. Not large, not visible unless you know where to look, but it's there now. You run your fingers over it each night before sleep. It grounds you more than any rosary ever did. And then one gray morning you receive news from inland. A girl you once knew, Marion, the 14-year-old bride, has disappeared. No one knows where. Some say she drowned. Others say she fled with a farmhand. But you know better. You don't speak her name aloud. But that night, you take a new shell and place it at the end of the row. And the next morning, you begin writing her story, not the one they told, but the one she might have lived. There's a storm. Later that week, wild, pounding, unforgiving. It rattles your windows and sends sea spray across your porch. You sit inside, Candle lit, pen in hand, and right through the thunder. When it passes, the sky's clean again. The air tastes like clarity. You step outside, hair damp, and stand barefoot on the wet stone path. You whisper, "I am still here," and the world, finally, whispers back. You are no longer hiding. You are no longer healing. You are building not just a life, a legacy, one that leaves a trail for the next girl, and the next, and the next. The sea is quieter now, not because it has changed, but because you no longer fear its voice. You've learned the difference between chaos and rhythm. The tide rises not to drown, but to return, just like you have. Morning arrives like a hush, the sky softened with mist, and your body moves through the routine not like a prisoner obeying, but like a soul remembering. You grind the herbs, you lace the stitches, you light the fire. The days unfold with no announcements, no approvals, no threats, just continuity. And in that quiet repetition, you find a kind of music you never knew peace could hum. Lise has grown bolder. She reads entire pages aloud now, mispronouncing half the words but never stopping. She writes her own sentences, silly and raw and strange, about a cat that steals bread and a ghost that sings in wells. You don't correct her. You laugh when she laughs. She asks you once what your favorite story is. You think for a moment, then say the one where the girl walks into the woods and never comes out. She blinks. Isn't that scary? You shake your head. Only if you wanted her to return. That night, she writes her own version this time. The girl becomes a tree. The women's circle has doubled. A baker's wife now comes. So does the widow who used to mutter to herself by the stream. They sit in your cottage, not for teaching, but for sharing. They speak of the things no one else asks about. The dull ache in the chest after years of obedience. The strange dreams that return at certain moons. The fear of being too loud, too old, too clever. You nod. You listen. And sometimes you speak. You tell them how silence can be a weapon and a shield. How the absence of a voice does not mean the absence of a thought. And they understand. Oh, how they understand. You've begun making bundles, little pouches of herbs, thread, and paper on each one. You draw a small circle, no explanation, just a mark. You give them to the girls when they leave, tucked into sleeves or tied to skirts. In case you forget, you say, you never say what's inside. They never ask. One day, one of the girls will open it and remember how it felt to be seen. Your journal is nearly full again, but this time, you don't hesitate. You begin a new one immediately. You don't hide it. It rests open on your table, a candle burning beside it like a guardian. You write about the boy who gave you a plum and didn't ask for anything in return. About the way grief feels heavier when no one else remembers the name. About how the skin beneath your fingers has become tougher, but the heart behind your ribs has softened. You write not to preserve, but to process. You write not to prove, but to exist. Scholars debate whether women in Tudor England had interior lives that resisted the roles they were forced to play. Diaries are rare, letters rare, but sometimes scraps appear, half-burnt notes, coated margins, pressed flowers between pages of sermons. Historians argue whether these count as resistance or coincidence. You know better. You know that silence is sometimes the only scream permitted, and you've screamed, haven't you? In every word you dared to speak, in every door you bolted from the inside, in every name you did not let erase you. A girl knocks on your door one evening, quiet, pale, unfamiliar. She says she heard about you from someone at a port, that you help girls who don't know where else to go. You open the door wide. You don't ask for her name. You offer tea, warmth, rest. She trembles when she takes off her cloak. She has bruises on her wrist in the shape of a ring. You say nothing. You bring ointment. That night, she sleeps curled at the foot of your bed. In the morning, she asks what she should do next. You hand her a quill. Write it down, you say, even if it's not true yet. You've begun sending letters to other towns now, carefully, subtly, using traders and herbalists you trust, small messages, symbols, offers. There are others, you know it. Other women with rooms like yours, cottages where girls find shelter, stories still being written. You imagine a map of tiny lights flickering across the country, and you wonder what if the kingdom they tried to build has already begun to rot from the inside. What if it's not the crown that survives history, but the quiet fires women lit beneath its shadow? Quirky legend in certain coastal areas, women used to sew tiny charms into the hems of their dresses, not for beauty, but for memory. A feather, a coin, a lock of hair. Not everyone knew they were there, but the weight changed how the dress moved. You think about this often. You sew a single pearl into your sleeve. It was from a necklace you never wore, given to you before your wedding. Now, it moves with you not as a chain, but as a choice. The sea is changing again. The wind has turned. You can feel the shift in the way birds fly lower, the way the sun dips quicker. A new season is coming. Not colder, just different. And you're not afraid. You used to dread change. Now, it feels like breath. You step into it the way a dancer leans into rhythm, trusting the floor to hold her. You don't need to know what comes next to know that you will meet it standing. And then one night, you dream of your younger self. Not the bride, the girl before her, the girl with ink-stained fingers and wild questions, and no understanding yet of how deep the silence would go. She looks at you across the dream with wide eyes. You reach for her hand, she takes it. No words are spoken, but when you wake, there's a strange feeling in your chest, like something you lost has come home. The next day, you take a walk alone, past the cliffs, down the path lined with thorny briars and sun-warmed moss. You carry no basket, no book, just your breath. You walk until the village vanishes from sight, until the wind is louder than your thoughts. And then you sit on a rock older than your grandmother's memory. You tilt your face to the sun, you close your eyes, and in the hush that follows, you hear it. Not a voice, not a god, not a command. Just this, you made it. You, the girl who was meant to disappear. You, the woman who wrote herself back into the world. You, the thread they couldn't snip clean. You survived, and you built more than escape. You built sanctuary, not for all, but for many, and that is enough. The sea hushes behind you now, just a rhythm, like your breath. The fire in your cottage burns low, the orange glow licking the walls like old stories wrapping themselves around sleep. Outside, the gulls have fallen silent, and even the wind has softened into something gentle. You sit by the window, your journal closed, the ink still wet. There's nothing more to write tonight, and that's all right. The story has already found its place. The shells on the sill glint faintly in the dim light, each one a name, a breath, a memory that was almost lost. You reach out and touch them one by one, not to mourn, but to remember that they were here, and you were here, and something in you held, still holds, and maybe always will. Lise is sleeping in the corner again, her mouth slightly open, her dream still clumsy with possibility. The other girls will return tomorrow. More stories, more laughter, more learning to uncoil the past and breathe into something new. You lean your head back and let the night carry you. The world may never know your name. History may never write you down, but the wind knows, the sea knows, and every girl who left your door stronger than she came in, she knows too. Now close your eyes, breathe in, let it all fall away. You're safe here. We made it. Together,